When they started their expedition, the last vestiges of summer warmth were leaving the Chained Isles. Not every region of the Dream Realm had seasons that were the same as those of the waking world, but this one was somewhat similar. By the time they were supposed to reach Night Temple, autumn would be in full swing. If everything went well, the journey was going to take 2 or 3 weeks. Sunny wanted to reach the mysterious citadel and retrieve the ivory knife by the middle of October, then rendezvous with Effie, Kai, and the Firekeepers at the Shipwreck Island in the first days of November. That would give them almost a full month to reach the Ebony Tower and enter the Seed before winter. Of course, in the Dream Realm, one could never put too much faith in any plan. Sunny felt reasonably confident in his ability to travel across Chained Isles, but he knew not to get arrogant. This was a wild and deadly land, one full of fearsome creatures and insidious threats. He had explored many islands and hunted down many abominations here, but even after 9 months of fighting and traveling across the region, Sunny was only well acquainted with the southeastern part of it, where the Sanctuary of Noctis was located. He had never ventured west or north of the Tear. The situation was only made worse by the fact that the closer one got to the vast emptiness at the heart of the Chained Isles, the more dire dangers they would face. To reach Night Temple quickly, Sunny and Cassia had to reach the Tear and skirt around its edge, which meant that they would be moving through the most perilous area of the entire region. Not all was bad, though. Cassia had some of the knowledge that Sunny lacked, since the Firekeepers had spent a lot of time in the northern reaches of the Chained Isles. He also had all the information copied from Mordret's map, which contained a detailed description of many places they were going to have to travel through. He was strong enough to face the dangers that awaited them there, and Cassia wasn't defenseless anymore. The 2 of them were enough. Most likely. These were the reasons why Sunny had decided to attempt the expedition without a full cohort. The following days proved that he had been right in his decision. Their journey was surprisingly smooth. The traversal itself provided no problems. Cassia was more than capable of moving from island to island without his help, which was a relief. Sunny thought back to how things were in the beginning, back when Nephis was protecting her. When he first saw them, he was convinced Nephis had caught her and was holding her captive. What a surprise it was to find out the stoic Changing Star was a protector and was helping someone who seemed so helpless. He wondered if she ever thought she would rise so high and become so formidable. All it took was finding ways to make her aspect and assets work for her. It was ingenious, really. Due to her second aspect ability and the quiet dancer, the blind girl was able to move through space with adequate measure of accuracy. As it turned out, she also had an ascended charm that provided a powerful augmentation to a single echo, which she used on her rapier. With its help, the dancer could carry her weight for a short distance, which allowed Cassia to get to and off of the chains with ease. The only drawback of the charm was that it ate through her soul essence rapidly, and she couldn't use it often or for long. Of course, traversal was the least of their problems. As they traveled further into the heart of the Chained Isles, more and more nightmare creatures picked up their scent. That was where Sunny came in. With the help of the Saint, and, when needed, the Soul Serpent, he was able to deal with anything that dared to attack them. Cassia helped too, but there was rarely anything for her to do. Sunny and his shadows were just too swift, cunning, and deadly. Their combined power was almost terrifying. That was not to say that the blind girl was useless. On the contrary, her presence was perhaps the single most important factor of why they were able to move toward their goal with such ease. Her great affinity to revelations, keen senses, and supernatural intuition complemented Sunny's battle prowess perfectly. It was almost disturbing how well they worked together, him scouting ahead and obliterating monsters, her guiding them through the maze of shifting aisles in a way that took them past the true horrors, the hidden hazards, and the crushing. Sonny wasn't sure when her future sight became more under control, but he was impressed with how seamlessly Cassia integrated it into her movements and into their collaboration. The strangest part about all of this was that they didn't even talk to each other that much, yet were able to achieve such a deep level of understanding. Most of the journey was spent in silence, with both of them preferring not to speak to the other unless absolutely necessary. There was no small talk, no irrelevant conversations, and no friendly banter. Sonny didn't even talk to his shadows and the saint like he was already used to, which made the silence almost suffocating. It was indeed a bit awkward in the beginning, but then he got used to it. He actually started to enjoy the peace and quiet, as well as the company of another human being, even if it was Cassia. Somehow, the silence didn't feel tense or necessarily bad. While he and Cassia didn't have the friendship they used to, he was surprised to find that he even enjoyed her company. He enjoyed that she didn't feel the need to fill the silence with useless chatter. That was never her way. If anything, Cassia seemed more like her. It was as if all the growing and changing and advancing she had gone through had turned her into the formidable, powerful woman she had become. Sonny was surprised to find how much the peace and quiet helped him to study and learn his own body and strengths even more than before. He had worked before, but with his latest upgrades, he could feel how his essence flowed through them. Their cooperation was efficient, seamless, and not burdened with emotions and other troublesome complications. An alliance of pure convenience. What was there to complain about? They traveled across islands that were barren and stark, and across islands that were lush with beautiful verdure, across islands that teemed with vile abominations, and islands that were full of nothing but bones and ash, across islands that were open and vast, and islands that were small and hid unseen dangers behind a veil of deception. It wasn't long before a day arrived when a dark line became visible far away over the northern horizon. When Sonny first saw it, he stood motionlessly for a while, looking north with a dark expression. The Hollow Mountains. After so long, he finally saw them again. Every day after that, the black line grew bigger and closer. Soon, he was already able to discern individual peaks and the jagged shape of the mountain chain that pierced the sky like the fangs of a colossal dragon. And on the day that the dark peaks towered above, shrouded in flowing mist, they finally reached Night Temple. The chain swayed lightly as Sonny and Cassia walked across it, rattling loudly from time to time. Since the island that they had just left was currently ascending, the one in front of them was below and fully visible. The northern island was not too large, maybe 2 kilometers in diameter. Its surface was one vast level plain, and covered entirely by a beautiful field of violet flowers, as if wrapped in a silken mantle. Despite the fact that the sun was high in the sky, the buds of the delicate flowers closed. From what Cassia had told him, Sonny knew that they would open only at night, emanating an eerie and beautiful light. He would have liked to witness that strange and magical sight himself, but right now, there were far more important things for them to do. Not to mention that, at the moment, Sonny's attention wasn't even on the island itself. Instead, he was looking past it, at the draconian peaks of the Hollow Mountains that towered above the island, submerging it into their vast and deep shadow. They were shrouded in white mist that flowed slowly down the dark slopes and fell into the black abyss of the sky below. like an endless wall of white, swirling clouds. The image of it was both magnificent and frightening. It was as though the sky itself was slowly being devoured by the lightless void, or maybe invading it. Looking at the dreadful mountains, Sunny couldn't help but wonder if Nephis was currently lost somewhere out there, in the white mist. Or had she not dared to enter it, and instead chose one of the other directions? There was no way to know, but he knew Nephis, and he knew that she had only managed to grow stronger each day. She was out there, somewhere. He wondered if she would ever reach him, or if he would die in the second nightmare before that could happen. His stomach twisted at the thought. He still wasn't sure how he felt about facing her again someday, but it felt so inevitable. It felt fated. He had no idea what lay before him in the treacherous path ahead, but something told him he would see her again someday. He just hoped he would be ready when that day arrived. With a sigh, he looked down and concentrated on putting one foot in front of the other. Soon, they reached the northern island and flew up. Sunny, with the help of the prowling thorn and the Darkwing, Cassia, by unsheathing the quiet dancer, jumping and holding tightly to the hilt as the flying rapier pulled her into the air. The two of them landed softly amidst the delicate flowers and looked around. Without the need to say anything, Sunny allowed the blind girl to take the lead and followed her as they walked toward the only landmark on the island, the ruins of the ancient fortress that perched precariously on its northern edge. It was very similar to the crumbled stronghold where he had met Effie and Kai. Trying not to disturb the flowers, they crossed the island and entered the fortress. Nothing attacked them on the way, and there were no sounds except for the whistling of the wind and that of their footsteps. The northern island was beautiful, silent, and strangely peaceful. Looking through the broken gateway of the ancient stronghold, Sunny studied the colossal chain that anchored the isles to the hollow mountains. The swirling mist flowed down on both sides of it, obscuring the point where the chain sunk into the dark stone. He remained motionless for a few moments, then shivered and looked away. At the very corner of the platform that lay beyond the gate, almost unnoticeable, a narrow set of stairs led down, cut from weathered rock. The path snaked around the overhanging slope, clinging to the stone surface as it led to the dark side of the island. Cassia put one hand on the stones and, tracing her fingers across them, cautiously stepped onto the stairs. Sunny followed, looking down with a dark expression. The path leading to the Night Temple was long and narrow. There was barely enough space for two people to walk side by side. To his right was the stone wall of the island, and to his left was the bottomless dark abyss of the sky below. One careless step could spell a person's doom. Thank the gods they both had memories that could fly. The placement of the stairs was not accidental as well. If an attacking force tried to lead an assault down the path, they would have had to fight the defenders one at a time, with the movements of the fighter's right hand being restricted by the slope. Range attacks wouldn't help much, due to the curvature of the wall, too. In a place like that, one warrior could stop an entire army. It was strategically brilliant, though Sunny wondered if the ancient army had the means to fly, or if they just did not believe they would ever fall. They descended lower and lower, finally reaching the dark side after what felt like hours. It was likely only minutes. Sunny had no idea how long it had actually taken them, and he wasn't sure he wanted to know. Time was funny in the dream realm. It seemed to stretch and shrink at random, only seeming to ever amplify one's nerves and fears. At the point where the slope turned almost completely horizontal, the stairs transformed into a strange hanging bridge that was attached to the stone surface above by rusty chains. It swayed precariously above the dark chasm of the sky below, leading all the way to the center of the aisle, to the Night Temple. Sonny froze, startled by a mournful sound of a loud bell that suddenly rolled through the darkness. In front of him, at some distance, a magnificent structure protruded from the underbelly of the floating island. Made out of black stone, it resembled a tall, somber cathedral that was somehow built upside down and hovered above the abyss of impenetrable darkness. The foundation was its highest point, and its 7 belfries descended into the depths of the black void, each ending with a short chain that held a massive bell cast of tarnished green copper. Since the Night Temple was located under the island, the light of the sun never reached it. Instead, the cathedral was shrouded in eternal shadow, with only the pale shining of the distant divine flames caressing its black walls. In a strange reversal, the velvet darkness of the abyss and the scattering of false stars in its depths seemed like a vast night sky hanging above it. As Sonny watched, a second bell rang. He shifted a little and turned his attention to the narrow path, tracing its treacherous steps all the way to the massive iron gates of the cathedral. Cassia turned to him, lingered for a moment, and said, "Let's go. They've seen us." Sonny nodded and took a step forward. Night Temple waited ahead, its gates opened like a hungry mouth. As they walked toward the gates, Sonny asked quietly, "So, what happens now exactly?" Cassia thought for a few moments before answering, "I am not sure. That depends on whether St. Cormac is inside the Citadel or out exploring the Hollow Mountains. In any case, my standing should be good enough to at least get an audience with one of the masters overseeing the temple in his absence." She hesitated, then added, "If we are allowed inside, there are several rules you must follow. Outsiders aren't allowed to summon any memories or echoes inside the Citadel. We can only go into the allowed areas unless a master is escorting us. We may not speak with the inhabitants of the temple unless they address us first. Additionally, all items we bring inside have to be inspected." Sonny frowned. The rules were not only strange, but also strict, and would put him at a disadvantage should anything happen. However, he remembered Skytide's warning. She told him not to break any rules inside the Night Temple. Sonny nodded. "All right, I won't do anything risky unless absolutely necessary. Let's see how this plays out first." As they approached the ornate gates, 2 figures became visible standing on both sides of it. One was a man, and the other was a woman. Both sentinels were in their 30s and had calm, cold, dangerous eyes. "So, these are the lost," Sonny thought. It was Sonny's first time meeting their kind. In truth, there was not much difference between them and those awakened who had not lost their physical bodies. That was not to say that the sentinels were ordinary. Both radiated an imposing, overbearing aura. Just from how the lost held themselves, Sonny could tell that they were extremely experienced and fearsome warriors. Their armors were perfectly crafted, and their weapons had a dangerous luster, all clearly of a high rank. The pressure these sentinels exerted reminded him of the oldest and most deadly hunters of the Dark City. Those who had survived long years of bloody battles in the hell of the Forgotten Shore. If he was honest, he had to admit that most awakened anchored at the sanctuary of Noctis seemed like children when compared to the two lost. These people were no joke, and there were 100 more inside the cathedral if what Cassia had told him was true. If all of them were the same as these sentinels. Sonny suppressed a shiver. He might have vastly underestimated the scale of the force that Clan Valor had stationed at the precipice of the Hollow Mountains. The somber cathedral hid an entire army. But why only keep the lost here? What purpose could it serve? The mystery had been tormenting him ever since he learned of it. As they got closer, one of the sentinels raised a hand, commanding them to stop. He studied both Sonny and Cassia for a while, and then said in a cold voice, "Lady Song of the Fallen, what a nice surprise to see you again. I hope that the other members of your cohort are well." His tone did not match the friendly words at all. Cassia simply nodded.
"They are well and in good health, anchored at the sanctuary of Noctis."
The second sentinel raised an eyebrow and spoke.
"Oh, what prompted you to make the long journey and return to our modest citadel then? In the company of a stranger and without your loyal comrades, no less."
Cassia glanced at Sonny and smiled.
"This is Awakened Sunless, and he is not a stranger. In fact, he is a dear friend of mine, and one of the few people in this world I would trust with my life. Both of us used to be Lady Changing Star's companions."
Sonny almost choked, but kept his thoughts to himself. Such smooth lies. Admirable. Cassia, meanwhile, lingered for a moment, then said,
"We hoped to have an audience with Lord Cormac."
The sentinels remained silent for a while, making Sonny feel a bit nervous. Finally, one of them answered, "Lord Cormac is carrying out one of his missions. He won't be back for several weeks at least." Cassia's smile didn't waver. Without skipping a beat, she said, her voice as polite and pleasant as before,
"Sir Pierce or Lady Welte, then?"
The two sentinels looked at each other. After a while, one of them sighed. "Wait here." With that, he disappeared, leaving Sonny and Cassia under the heavy gaze of the remaining lost. Sonny stared back, shamelessly studying the sentinel. No matter how he tried, he couldn't tell the difference. She looked just like a normal awakened would in the dream realm. Well, it made sense. Her spirit body was the same after all.
"What are you staring at, boy?"
Sonny looked up and smiled. For a moment, he was very tempted to answer honestly, but then his common sense won over.
"Your armor, ma'am. It seems like a fine memory."
The sentinel snarled and didn't say anything. After some time, the second one returned and beckoned them to follow. They were led into a small, chilly room at the side of the gate and handed 2 sets of simple garments made out of crude cloth, then locked inside. Sonny stared at the bundle in his hands with a perplexed expression.
What is that for?"
Cassia sighed and unbuckled her belt, then dismissed the quiet dancer and placed its empty scabbard on a bench.
"No memories or echoes allowed, remember?"
Sonny frowned, then glanced at his armor. If he dismissed it, he would be more or less naked.
"They are expecting us to change here?"
The blind girl silently turned her back to him. Sonny hesitated for a moment, then did the same. His shadow looked away too. Cursing inwardly, he dismissed the undying chain and felt the shadows in the tiny room shift as Cassia's cuirass and coat crumbled into a rain of sparks. They were close enough for him to hear the steady beating of her heart and sense the heat emanating from her body. Trying not to let his imagination wander, Sunny put on a pair of simple trousers and heard the fabric rustle as it slid across her smooth skin.
Bastards. They couldn't give us 2 rooms to change?
Suppressing his annoyance, Sunny put on a tunic and frowned. Its sleeves were too short to hide the coils of the soul serpent. More than that, they revealed the 2 shadows that were wrapped around his body, shrouding it in a thin layer of darkness. Not to mention that both the tunic and the trousers were several sizes too big for him. With a sigh, Sunny commanded the shadows to crawl up his arms, hiding them from sight. Then, he dismissed the serpent, bent down to roll up the pant legs, then put on a pair of leather sandals and cleared his throat.
Are you done?
Cassia answered after a short pause.
Yes.
The clothes provided to her consisted of similar sandals and a long tunic that left her shoulders bare and her legs exposed below the knee. The silver half-mask was gone too, revealing Cassia's beautiful blue eyes. Sunny stared at her for a few moments, realizing that he had almost forgotten how they looked in these peasant rags. He scowled and banged on the door. Soon, the same sentinel let them out and led them through into the depths of the Night Temple. As soon as they left the gateway behind, Sunny tensed as if expecting something terrible to happen. But nothing did. The sentinel glanced at him and frowned.
What are you waiting for? Come. Sir Pierce will be with us shortly.
The interior of the somber cathedral was as bizarre as its exterior. Sunny expected the actual floors to be constructed properly, and some of the corridors they walked through were, but other parts of the Night Temple were upside down as well. The flat floors serving as ceilings, and the arching ceiling serving as uneven floors. And that was just the outward ring. He didn't even want to imagine how the temple itself and the inner sanctum looked. As they walked, he saw several lost silently going about the mundane business of maintaining the citadel. They were dressed in the same crude clothes he wore now and wielded no weapons. However, every one of them, from a person calmly changing the oil in the wall lamps to a man sweeping the floors, radiated the same aura of strength and lethality as the 2 sentinels that had met them at the gate. They were all battle-hardened veteran elites.
Just what is this place?
Sunny wondered. After descending a few sets of twisting stairs, Sunny and Cassia were led to another, slightly bigger room. That one had a large table in its center. The sentinel gestured at it and said, his voice not betraying any emotions,
Sir Pierce is on his way. Please present the items you brought from the outside for inspection.
Cassia took a step forward and placed her belt and scabbard on the table. The Lost shifted his gaze to Sunny and waited.
All my things are stored inside a memory.
He considered hiding the existence of the covetous coffer, but thought better of it. There was nothing inside of it worth hiding anyway. Or, rather, almost nothing. The sentinel frowned and said in a dark tone,
Summon it.
Soon, the small box was sitting on the table. Sunny opened it and started producing item after item, slowly building a large pile. They were spices, cooking utensils, hygienic products, several packs of underwear, both male and female, which earned him a strange look. A piece of broken mirror, a couple of soul shards, a folding chair, various snacks, packs of tea and coffee, and many more. As the pile slowly became larger and larger, the sentinel's face grew more and more incredulous. Finally, his eye twitched.
How much trash do you have in that box?
Sonny smiled.
Almost finished.
He fished out a tube of sunscreen and several sticks of lip balm, threw them into the pile, then thrust his arm into the maw of the covetous coffer up to the shoulder, swept its bottom a few times, ignoring Weaver's needle and diamond string, then, finally, took a step back. Sonny sighed in relief when his flaw didn't force him to remove everything. The Lost shook his head and started picking up the items one after another, inspecting them carefully. What he was expecting to discover, Sonny did not know. At that moment, the door of the room opened, and a tall man with sharp features and steely eyes came in. His dark hair was cut short, and there was stubble on his cheeks. The man wore scale armor forged out of lusterless blue steel and held himself with the relaxed confidence of an experienced killer. Sonny didn't need an introduction to realize that he was standing in front of a master, and a powerful one at that. Sir Pierce seemed to be less frightening than Morgan of Valor, but Morgan was barely older than Effie, while this man had a decade or two to sharpen his skill and accumulate battle experience. He was a knight of valor still. Sonny harbored no illusions. In front of this monster, neither Cassia nor he stood a chance, especially not while surrounded by an army of 100 awakened elites.
Why am I thinking about this? We are here to talk, not fight.
And they really needed this conversation to go well. Depending on how convincing they could be, and how receptive Sir Pierce was, Sonny would either have to do things the easy way, the hard way, or abandon his plans to retrieve the second knife altogether. The sentinel greeted the master respectfully, and then continued to inspect the mountain of items Sonny had produced from the covetous coffer. Sir Pierce glanced at it for a moment, then turned to Cassia.
Awakened Cassia, welcome back to the Night Temple.
Cassia bowed slightly.
Sir Pierce?
Sonny suppressed the desire to roll his eyes.
It's like I am invisible. Honestly, that might be for the best.
Both the sentinels and the formidable master had ignored his existence entirely, preferring to address Cassia. Part of the reason must have been that they already knew her, but mostly it had to do with her status as a bearer of a true name. Well, it suited Sonny perfectly. He liked to remain as unnoticeable as possible. Sir Pierce and Cassia exchanged several pleasantries, slowly approaching the discussion of the real issue. Sonny listened attentively, knowing how much rode on this conversation. But a sudden noise jerked his attention away.
What? What was that?
For a moment, he thought that he heard someone sigh deeply behind him. No, he definitely did. But there was no one there. Sonny frowned.
Am I hallucinating, or?
It was then that a familiar voice suddenly resounded in his ears.
Sunless, I'm so glad that you made it.
Sonny's eyes widened slightly. He looked at the sentinel, Cassia, and Master Pierce. None of them showed any sign that they had heard anything. Turning away, as if to stare at the wall, he hid his face and said in a barely audible whisper,
Mordred, where have you been, bastard?
His words sounded harsh, but his tone was elated. The voice chuckled, making Sonny feel a bit tense for some reason. Was it him, or did the mysterious prince sound a bit different?
Me? Oh, actually I was with you this whole time, watching as you traveled across the dream realm. I just chose not to speak.
Sonny blinked a couple of times. A heavy, cold feeling settled in his chest. Something was wrong. Very, very wrong.
You chose not to speak? Why?
Mordred remained silent for a few moments, then said in his usual pleasant tone,
With how cautious you are, I was afraid that you wouldn't come if I said too much.
What? What does he mean?
Sonny felt his heart beating wildly in his chest. His intuition was sounding the alarms, filling him with a sudden feeling of dread.
Fooled? Was I fooled?
Sonny tried to control his spiraling thoughts.
Come where? Here to the Night Temple?
At that moment, the lost sentinel picked up the piece of the broken mirror from the pile. Mordred spoke again, his voice still friendly, but suddenly much colder and deeper beneath the surface, like a dark and restless ocean hiding under a thin veil of mist.
Indeed. Thank you for bringing this piece of mirror to me, Sunless. I am very grateful.
Sir Pierce casually glanced at the sentinel while responding to Cassia. His gaze stopped at the mirror. In the next moment, his pupils widened.
And very sorry for what is about to happen next.
The formidable Sir Pierce was suddenly at the table, the lost thrown aside. The piece of mirror was in his hand. Throwing a wild look at Sonny, he screamed,
Where did you find it, boy? Answer me!
Sonny took a step back, stunned. He remembered St. Tyrus telling him not to mention Reckoning Island. However, at the moment, it seemed like Pierce would rip him apart if Sonny dared to twist the truth even a little, so he answered honestly.
Reckoning. I picked it up after slaying a strange creature.
Sir Pierce stared at him for a moment, and then his face suddenly changed. It became deathly pale and motionless, as if aged by 10 years. His eyes grew wide and glassy. The fearsome master was terrified. But before any of them could do anything, a thin crack appeared on the shard in his hand, and in the next moment, all Sonny could hear was the sound of breaking mirrors. Sonny flinched as the sound of shattering mirrors filled his ears. No one else seemed to react to it, though. But barely a moment later, the cracked piece of glass in Master Pierce's hand exploded into a rain of shards. The sound abruptly disappeared. The fearsome man shuddered.
No.
Sonny's mind was racing.
What is happening?
He took a step back. Things were happening too fast. He couldn't comprehend the situation yet. All he knew was that his heart was cold, and his mind was overwhelmed by a premonition of something ominous, dreadful, and disastrous happening. And he felt deep down in his stomach that he had been fooled. He had made a massive mistake. Cassia shifted slightly, tilting her head with a tense and confused expression. In the next moment, Pierce swiftly turned to the sentinel, his face still pale and terrified, but now also full of grim resolve. His voice, which had been so confident just a few moments ago, now sounded panicked.
Seal the temple. Destroy the gateway. Go now! We can't let that thing escape.
Sonny's eyes widened.
Destroy the gateway? What the hell does he mean?
And what thing was he talking about? The sentinel didn't seem to have these questions. Pierce's terror had spread to him like an infection, but the man simply nodded and darted out of the room, without letting fear slow him down. Cassia took a step back to let him pass, then asked tensely,
Sir Pierce, What is going on?
As though reminded of their presence, the master turned around and threw a dark, menacing look at Sunny.
You!
His voice shook with barely suppressed fury. Sunny thought about summoning the cruel sight, but before he could even move, the tall man was already beside him, grabbing him by the shoulder. If it wasn't for the bone weave, Sunny's clavicle might have cracked from the terrible pressure. With his other hand, Pierce grabbed Cassia, causing her to yelp in pain.
I'll deal with the two of you later. There's no time.
The next thing Sunny knew, they were being dragged out of the room. He threw a regretful glance at the pile of his belongings that was left laying on the table, stared at the covetous coffer for a moment, and then turned away.
What to do? What to do?
The situation was clearly out of his control now. Mordred had done something, had manipulated him to do something. And now, the whole citadel was on high alert, and Sunny was definitely in trouble. Whatever it was that the mysterious prince had used Sunny to achieve, it was bad enough to terrify a master and justify the irrevocable destruction of a precious gateway. So there were two questions.
Should I try to fight my way out? And should I also be terrified of the thing that Mordred unleashed?
Suddenly, another thought occurred to Sunny.
Or is Mordred himself that thing?
His heart grew even colder. There was not enough information to answer the second question, but the first one was easy enough. Sunny was strong, but not nearly strong enough to fight 2 masters and 100 deadly elites, especially not on their home ground. Plus, both he and Cassia had status. Even a great clan wouldn't dare to make them disappear without proper cause.
I need more information. Let's see how this plays out and make a move if the circumstances demand it.
So, he didn't struggle as Master Pierce dragged them into the corridor. Outside the small room, the citadel that had been peaceful and somber before was now in a state of pandemonium. Several Lost darted past them, their shadows dancing on the black walls in the orange glow of the ornate oil lamps. Sunny could see motion and sense hurried but orderly movement in every direction. Unlike before, each inhabitant of the temple was now clad in armor and wielded deadly weapons. They were swift and disciplined, like professional soldiers who were preparing for war. And there was an army of them. But despite all that, was it nervousness he felt behind the facade of calmness the Lost showed? Master Pierce shouted at one of the sentinels, ordering him to stop, then pushed Sunny and Cassia toward the man.
Lock these 2 up in the lesser cell.
Sunny wanted to express his outrage, but before he could, the whole temple suddenly shuddered. A few moments later, a deafening sound wave rolled through the corridor.
The gates! They have closed them!
But it wasn't as simple as that. Since they were still in the outward ring of the citadel, his shadow sense had been somewhat able to reach into the emptiness beyond its outer wall. But as soon as the gates closed, that changed, as though the temple was now completely cut off from the outside world. It was now sealed, with them inside. The sentinel silently grabbed the 2 of them and dragged them away. Staggering and trying not to fall, Sunny threw a glance behind his shoulder. The last thing he saw was a woman with beautiful red hair appearing before the fearsome master. She wore a simple black tunic and leather vambraces, her shins protected by a pair of greaves. The woman's face was grim and full of tension.
Pierce, the spell, what happened?
A moment later, the 2 disappeared around the corner.
This must be Master Welty.
The Lost swiftly dragged them through the disorienting maze of corridors and stairs. They were descending lower and lower, most likely heading toward one of the cathedral belfries. His expression was dark and severe, and for a good reason. Everywhere they passed through, the inhabitants of the Night Temple were busy preparing for battle. It was as though they were expecting to face a terrifying siege. The threat, however, didn't seem to be coming from the outside. Instead, most of the lost were rushing deeper into the temple, toward its inner sanctum. It wasn't long before they heard screams. The sound traveled through the confusing interior of the cathedral in a strange manner, so it was hard to say from which direction the screams came. They seemed distant, and yet Sonny couldn't help but feel his blood run cold. These chilling wails were full of indescribable agony and terror. He knew the type too well. These were the screams that humans let out when they were not only horribly hurt, but also maimed, knowing that their lives were either over or would never be the same. The sentinel in charge of them stopped for a moment. His face grew ashen, and without saying a word, he continued to drag them toward a heavy metal door at the end of a long corridor. The Lost used an elaborate key to open the door and pushed them inside. Sonny and Cassia found themselves in a circular chamber that had a tall ceiling, or rather, a tall floor, since it was built in reverse. The doomed ceiling of the chamber was actually beneath their feet, sloping down like a deep crater. In the center of the cell, a large iron cage stood, each bar of it as thick as a man's arm. Strange runes were inscribed all around the cage, circling it entirely.
What the?
A moment later, the sentinel unceremoniously pushed them in the backs, causing Sonny and Cassia to roll down the slope of the dome and through the door of the cage, which he then promptly closed, cutting off their way to freedom.
No way.
Sonny rose to his feet, turned around, and watched as the Lost left the room and shut the door behind him. For a few moments, they were left in absolute silence. The room was dark, with only a single oil lamp burning on the wall near the exit. Its orange flame trembled and danced, barely managing to keep the shadows at bay. Sonny gritted his teeth, then kicked the iron bars with all his might and screamed in anger and frustration.
Damn it! Damn it all!
Behind him, Cassia slowly stood up, then swayed a little.
Sonny?
He turned to her and snarled.
What?
The blind girl grimaced in pain.
Something is wrong. I feel...
Sonny stared at her for a few moments, then blinked and looked outside the cage. The runes surrounding it were slowly starting to emanate an eerie, dangerous blue glow. Sonny looked at the runes. Their eerie glow was swiftly glowing brighter and brighter, drowning the chamber in a ghostly light. Slowly, a deep frown appeared on his face. Then, suddenly, his eyes widened.
Shit!
But it was already too late. The runes shimmered, and in the next moment, he felt his reserve of shadow essence plunging. It was as though something was draining the essence out of his soul with terrifying speed. At the same time, the range of shadow sense diminished even further, becoming limited by the size of the cage. The gloomy shadow recoiled, trying to get away from the shining runes. Sonny hurriedly tried to summon the cruel sight, but he was a second too slow. Before the spear could form itself from the sparks of light, his essence ran dry, and it disintegrated before assuming a physical form.
Damnation!
He looked helplessly at the bars of the cage and clenched his fists. This was indeed a jail cell built to contain Awakened. Without shadow essence, he wouldn't be able to use Shadow Step to escape. More than that, he couldn't summon memories anymore. Manifesting them into reality demanded essence as well, even if it was a tiny amount. The same went for echoes, and even shadows. He also felt weak, and was only going to grow weaker in the coming hours. Without essence circulating through his body, Sunny's strength was vastly diminished. Whoever created this damned cage really knew what they were doing. With a resentful snarl, Sunny turned around and allowed himself to slide down the center of the dome, where Cassia stood with a lost expression on her pale, delicate face. Raising one hand awkwardly, she tentatively moved it through the air around her and whispered,
I am blind again.
Sunny frowned, stared at her for a moment, and then turned away.
You were always blind.
Of course, he knew what Cassia meant. Without soul essence, the aspect ability that allowed her to perceive the world from several seconds in the future was gone too. It wasn't exactly sight, but it was something that had replaced being able to see for her. All of the progress she had made over the last year was snuffed out in mere moments. Sunny's words might have been cruel, but he was not in the mood for pleasantries. He could barely scrape together anything even close to optimism for himself. He felt trapped and cut off from everything. He hadn't felt this lost since he was stuck in the sky below. But in the sky below, he at least felt the sensation of moving in a direction. This? Being locked in a cage, powerless to escape? This was his worst nightmare. And he had no one but himself to blame for ending up that way. Turning around from the blind girl, Sunny sat down, lowered his head, and grabbed it with both hands.
Curse him.
Suddenly, the cathedral shook again. Cassia remained silent for a while, then said quietly,
That must have been the gateway. They really destroyed it.
Sunny closed his eyes.
I guess you were right.
He heard her sitting down opposite him and wondered about the black altar that was now laying somewhere in the depths of the citadel in pieces. Was the ivory knife destroyed as well? Had there even been a second knife to begin with? Or was it all just a lie Mordred had invented to lure him into the Night Temple? What else had he lied about? Sunny gritted his teeth, suppressing a groan. He felt scared, furious, and utterly humiliated. He had been so careful not to trust the mysterious voice after hearing it for the first time. But Mordred had been so helpful, and had provided him with so much valuable information that proved to be true. Sunny was, most likely, only alive because of the Lost Prince's aid. Even so, he had never lowered his guard. If there had been the smallest hint that Mordred wanted something from him, he would have suspected the worst. But the bastard was just too devious and cunning. Terrifyingly so. Mordred had managed to play him like a fiddle. He had understood perfectly just how untrusting Sunny was, and went with the lightest of approaches, knowing that any pressure would scare his paranoid mark off. Mordred had simply mentioned the ivory knife in passing and never spoke about it again. In fact, after the hook was in, he had never spoken to Sunny again. Observing silently and waiting for his prey to come to him of its own volition. Sunny shuddered.
He was watching this whole time. Oh gods, how much has he seen?
He was willing to bet that there had never even been a need for Mordred to wait days between their conversations. All of it was just a part of an intricate web of lies and manipulation. Mordred was watching him the whole time, and had been ever since.
Fool! I'm such a fool!
How had he allowed himself to be fooled so completely? A crazy smile suddenly appeared on Sunny's face, and he let out a stifled laugh. Wasn't the answer obvious? Truth. His downfall was the truth. Like a masterful liar, Mordred had mixed just enough of it into his lies to make them believable.
Oh, the irony.
Cassia shifted slightly and asked, her voice soft and cautious.
Sonny, what exactly happened back there?
He let out a bitter chuckle and answered in a dark tone.
Why bother asking? Don't you know everything?
The blind girl didn't answer, and after some more time passed, he sighed.
Sorry. It was me. I got us into this mess.
Sonny straightened and forced himself to calm down. Dwelling on the past was not going to do them any good. This situation was bad, but not hopeless. The future was uncertain, and there would surely be a chance to turn everything around. He just needed to remain in control of himself and be ready to act when an opportunity presented itself. Who said that Mordred was going to have the last laugh? Sonny finally spoke.
Do you remember the mysterious Lost I told you about? The one who had taught me about the seed and the knives.
Cassia nodded slowly. Sonny lingered for a few moments, then shook his head.
Well, as it turns out, he lured me into the Night Temple on purpose. He needed the piece of mirror I found a while back for some reason. When Master Pierce saw it, he knew. And that's when all hell broke loose.
She remained silent for some time, and then asked,
Do you think that this Lost is here, in the Night Temple?
Sonny looked away. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded grim.
I do. Actually, I think that this whole citadel is a prison. A prison that was meant to contain a single creature. Him.
Cassia shivered and hugged her shoulders. A heavy silence settled between them. After a while, she said,
Maybe you're right, but Sonny,
her voice trembled.
What kind of a being would require 100 awakened fighters, 2 ascended knights, and a saint to guard it?
Sonny stared at her, not knowing what to say. The cold he felt in his heart started spreading, and he couldn't escape it. He had no idea. Sonny felt that there was a hint about what manner of a creature Mordred was in the fact that only the lost and human echoes had been allowed to guard him, but that was too little information to make a guess. What else did he know about the man who called himself the Prince of Nothing? He was reasonably sure that Mordred was a human, or at least had been once at some point. A nightmare creature could fake a human voice, but not the knowledge of the waking world that Mordred had shown. Sonny also felt that the mysterious prince had told the truth about conquering the first nightmare at 12 years of age. Other than that, all Sonny had was the description of the cruel sight, which had told of a prince that had been given away to a monstrous dream spawn and later returned, only to find out that he wasn't welcome in his father's home anymore. That, and the fact that the mirror beast had been created by Mordred, much like the saint had been created by him. That was not much to go off of. With a sigh, Sonny looked around the cage. Due to the concave nature of its floor, he and Cassia were forced to stay close to each other. The only surface flat enough to sit comfortably was at the very center of the dome, and not too large in diameter. The cage was utterly empty, with the exception of a rusty bucket that was covered by a wooden lid. Sonny stared at the bucket for a while, then grimaced.
How long do you think they'll keep us here?
Cassia remained silent for a while, then answered evenly.
That depends on whether they can contain the prisoner.
A deep scowl appeared on his face. Would 100 elite awakened warriors and 2 masters all in service to a great clan, be able to handle Mordred? Before today, he would have said yes without a moment of hesitation. No matter how powerful the mysterious prince was, how could he contend against an entire army? But after seeing the terror on Sir Pierce's face, and how nervous the lost sentinel was, Sonny wasn't so sure anymore. And what would happen if Mordred somehow prevailed? Would they be safe? Or would they learn that terror themselves?
Shit.
Sonny threw a dark glance at the door of the chamber and closed his eyes. For now, there was nothing they could do but wait. Minutes passed, slowly converging into hours. With no windows, it was hard to measure the passage of time. Sonny and Cassia mostly remained silent, partially because each was preoccupied with their own thoughts, and partially because there was nothing useful they could say. The Night Temple shuddered several more times, but these tremors weren't as strong as the first two. Sonny silently meditated, feeling the shadow essence dissipate from his muscles and his strength slowly diminishing. After a while, he stood up, climbed to the walls of the cage, and studied the runes. Then, explored every centimeter of the cell. He even tried to bend and dislodge the iron bars, but it was useless. The cage seemed to be built to imprison masters, or perhaps even saints. Even at his full power, Sonny wouldn't have been able to break free with brute force. After a while, he had no choice but to slide back to the center of the dome and resume doing nothing. He hadn't had an opportunity like this in a long while. Doing nothing was sort of relaxing, if he ignored the fact that their lives were hanging by a thread, of course. The blue glow of the runes and the orange light of the oil lamp were soft and dim, leaving the chamber dark and full of shadows. Somewhere, outside, a gruesome massacre was perhaps taking place. But here, everything was calm and silent. Sonny was on the verge of dozing off when Cassia suddenly turned to face the door.
Someone is coming.
He opened his eyes and stood up, then glanced at the oil lamp with a dark expression. Its dancing flame trembled and then disappeared for a moment when the door opened with a bang and a gust of wind entered the cell. 5 people came inside. 4 of them were lost warriors, their faces grim and their armor bloodied. 1 was the same sentinel who had locked them inside, his face ashen and pale, and a piece of white cloth wrapped around his head like a makeshift bandage. The 5th was a woman with beautiful red hair, wearing a black tunic. Master Welty. There was a strange amulet in the shape of an anvil hanging on a thin chain around her neck, and murder in her eyes. The aura she emanated was truly frightening.
So Mordred did not manage to escape after all.
The master threw a cold glance at Cassia, then turned to Sonny.
You brought that piece of mirror into the Citadel, correct?
Sonny shifted slightly.
I did.
The corner of Welty's mouth twitched.
Who instructed you to do so?
He blinked a couple of times, startled but not overly surprised by the accusation.
No one instructed me. I had no idea what that shard was. I just thought that it was curious and I picked it up.
The beautiful woman glanced at one of the lost, who nodded.
He is telling the truth, or at least he believes in what he says.
Sonny studied the lost, who was a man in his 30s, with a gaunt face and clear gray eyes.
Great. Another walking lie detector.
Welty frowned, then pierced Sonny with a heavy gaze.
What was your purpose in coming to the Night Temple?
Sonny paused for a few moments. When he spoke, his voice sounded frightened and a little shaky.
I've been told that there is a special knife here, on the altar. I'm interested in that knife because it has to do with the past of the Chained Isles. I am a researcher at the Awakened Academy. You might have read my previous exploration report. It's, quite famous.
The master stared at him for some time, then glanced at the lost with clear eyes and shook her head dejectedly.
All this because of one clueless fool. Yes, yes,
Sonny thought with a mix of bitterness and desperation.
I am a pathetic, useless fool. Believe it.
Sonny cleared his throat.
Master Welty, I am very sorry for the trouble I've caused, but, what is going on? And when are you going to release us?
She suddenly let out a stifled laugh, then looked at him with a dark, furious expression.
Release you? If you knew what your actions have caused, you would have begged me to keep you in this cell. At least that fiend can't get to you here. No, the two of you will remain locked up until we deal with the mess you've made. And we will deal with it. Believe me.
That was not exactly the answer Sonny wanted to hear, but at least it gave him some information. Mordred wasn't contained yet. Rather, he and the Valor forces seemed to be in some sort of a stalemate. Master Welty gritted her teeth, then turned away. However, before leaving, she stopped for a moment and then said, her voice grim,
Now that the temple is sealed, no one but Lord Cormac can unseal it anyway. With the gate destroyed, there's no escape. Where would you even go?
With that, she clenched her fists and left the chamber. The four lost followed, closing the door behind them. Sonny stared at it for a while, a bleak expression on his face.
No one but Lord Cormac can unseal it? Crap.
The saint was not supposed to return until a month from now. He looked at Cassia, then at their cage, and lastly, at the glowing runes. This was going to be a long and terrible month. He sat back down, waited for a while, and then turned to Cassia.
Did you take a look at her attributes?
She sat down too and sighed.
Yes, her, the four lost with her, Sir Pierce too. I also saw the name and rank of their aspects.
Sonny frowned.
What? Since when can you read aspects too?
The blind girl shrugged.
Since my awakening.
He stared at her for a bit.
What a useful ability,
he thought, wondering how useful that was, and how much about him that likely revealed to her. If she had not known some of his secrets before, she surely knew them now.
How infuriating.
Sonny grimaced, lingered for a bit, and then said,
Good. Chances are we'll need that information before all of this is over.
He didn't press her for answers yet, since there was a lot he had to think about, and they weren't particularly pressed for time. Some more time passed, with both of them remaining silent. After a while, the door of the chamber opened once more, and the familiar four lost entered. The one with a bandaged head was carrying a tray of food and a water skin. He studied them for a few moments, a cold expression on his handsome face, then threw the food and the water skin through the iron bars without approaching the cage. Sonny suppressed his anger and opened his mouth, assuming the persona of a cowardly researcher.
Hey, sir? Sir Awakened? Can you tell us, what is going on? Please, we don't even know what is wrong.
The sentinel glanced at him darkly and spat in a commanding tone.
Silence.
His voice was clear and strong, full of arrogant confidence, and deep animosity toward the two of them. Without saying another word, the Lost left, once again locking the door behind them. Sonny remained motionless for a few moments, then slowly lowered his gaze and glanced at the food that rolled down the slope of the dome to his feet. Then, suddenly he threw his head back and laughed loudly.
Oh gods. Never thought I'd be eating this crap again.
Right in front of him, reflecting the blue glow of the runes, 2 colorless tubes of synth paste were laying on the floor. He knew their shape all too well. They had a late supper, which consisted of a synth paste that had the consistency of mud and tasted about the same. Still, this vile invention was cheap to produce and supposed to contain all the nutrients one needed to, barely, survive. Sonny had not missed the damn sludge at all. In the outskirts, the easiest food to get was called a universal ration pack, or simply a rat pack. It contained a tube of synth paste, a cheap water filter, and several dry, tasteless crackers. This was what he mostly ate before becoming an awakened, so now Sonny felt as though his life had come full circle. Such irony. After a while, tired and weak without the essence sustaining their bodies, they decided to sleep. The flat space in the center of the cage was so small that Sonny and Cassia had to settle with their backs against each other. With nothing but 2 layers of thin fabric separating their skin, Sonny could feel the heartbeat reverberating through her lithe body. The cage was cold and chilly, but at least his back was warm. They lay in silence for a while, trying to fall asleep. Before they did, however, Cassia suddenly spoke.
Sonny,
Her voice was quiet and hesitant.
how is she doing? Do you know?
He kept his eyes closed and remained silent for a few moments, then said with no particular emotion,
She is doing great. She is a devil already. Now stop bothering me.
Cassia sighed and didn't say anything else. In the middle of the night, if it was night outside, he suddenly woke up, disturbed by a sudden change in her breathing. Through the thin fabric of their clothes, he could feel the blind girl's body tense up, her breathing rugged and uneven. Sonny hesitated, then turned around and looked at Cassia. In the pale glow of the runes, her delicate face seemed white and bloodless. It was contorted in a tortured grimace, with beads of sweat appearing on her forehead. Her eyes were moving hectically behind the eyelids. He froze, not knowing what to do. It was obvious that Cassia was having a vision, and that like most of her visions, this one was painful and terrifying. Was he supposed to wake her up? Or would it do more harm than good? Before he could decide, she suddenly sat up with a stifled yelp. Her chest was rising and falling wildly, and there was a panicked expression on her face. The blind girl raised her hands and tried to feel her surroundings, currently not quite remembering where she was. Sonny caught one of them, making Cassia flinch, and said darkly,
Take a hold of yourself, damn it. You're in a cage in the Night Temple. Stop thrashing around.
She froze, surrendering to his iron grip. After a while, Cassia took a deep breath and said, weakly,
I'm all right.
He let her go, picked up the mostly empty water skin, and put it onto her hand. The blind girl drank the last of their water and closed her eyes, her breathing slowly returning to normal. Sonny waited for a minute, and then asked in a gloomy tone,
Another vision?
She silently nodded. A dark grin appeared on his face.
What? Did we die again?
Cassia shook her head, then opened her eyes and frowned.
No, this time I saw someone else.
She put the water skin on the floor, hugged her knees, and spoke again, her voice still tense, but now much calmer.
It was one of the lost, the man with grey eyes who advised Lady Welty. He was in front of a large crucible, throwing shards of broken mirrors into the fire. There were thousands of them, all reflecting his image. Only, at some point, one of the reflections stopped.
She shivered.
The lost stopped too, and stared at the motionless reflection, his eyes full of utter terror. It was as though he was paralyzed by fear. He opened his mouth to scream, but no sound came out of his mouth. After that, he didn't move anymore. But the reflection finally did. It raised its head and smiled.
Cassia grew silent, and then added, her voice trembling.
That smile filled me with so much dread that all I could think about was to run away. But I couldn't. That was when I woke up.
Sonny looked at her for a while, thinking. His face was cold and grim. It wasn't hard to understand what the vision was about. Mordrett's aspect was somehow tied to mirrors after all. But what did it all mean? What were his powers exactly? He sighed and turned away.
It's fine. Thank you for telling me. Go back to sleep, if you can.
She listened to him and slowly laid down. However, Sonny could tell by her breathing that she was still wide awake. He couldn't sleep either. In the morning, the door of their cell opened, and the same group of lost brought them more food. Only this time, there were only 3 of them. The man with grey eyes was nowhere to be seen. The 3 lost seemed to be in better shape than they had been the day before. Their armor was cleaned, and their wounds were properly tended to. However, they looked worse for wear mentally. Their faces were paler, their movements were full of tension, and there was a strange darkness hiding in their eyes. Only the sentinel who had spoken to Sonny before was the same. If anything, his cold resolve seemed to have grown stronger, as did his silent hostility. Without saying a word, he threw the tubes of synth paste into the cage, then pointed at the water skin laying on the floor near Cassia. Sonny tossed the empty water skin to him and received a new one in return.
Sir, can you please tell us what is going on? Where is your, 4th friend? Did something happen?
The sentinel stared at him with a heavy, grim expression. When he answered, his voice was steady and even.
Don't speak unless spoken to.
With that, the lost left. The door of the cell locked with a loud click. The flame of the oil lamp trembled, and everything became silent once again. Sonny sighed.
What an unfriendly fellow.
Just like that, their imprisonment continued. There were no windows in the stone chamber, so it was almost impossible to track the passage of time. Their only hint was the appearance of the 3 lost, who brought them food and water once every day, and sometimes changed the oil in the lantern. Sonny and Cassia spent the first few days in silence and tense, grim anticipation. They slept back to back, sharing the heat of their bodies to overcome the chilling cold of the prison cell, and suffered through the daytime without speaking to each other, unless absolutely necessary. Both were waiting for something disastrous to happen. However, nothing did. The Night Temple had not shaken again, and nothing came through the heavy door to either set them free or destroy them. Neither Master Welty nor Master Pierce had visited the enchanted chamber as well, as if Sunny and Cassia were completely forgotten. The stone cell was silent and unchanging. However, they could still tell that something sinister and dire was going on outside. The evidence was in how the three lost that brought them food, their only connection to the rest of the world, looked and behaved. With each day, two of them seemed more and more frightened, while the third grew increasingly cold and grim. No matter how much Sunny tried to get the sentinel to speak, the arrogant warrior refused to tell him anything, and only glared at the prisoners through the iron bars of the cage, his eyes full of ire. Their actions changed too. If before all three used to look at Sunny and Cassia while delivering the food, now only the sentinel did. The other two stood facing the door, their weapons drawn. Sometimes their hands were trembling. Realizing that nothing was going to change anytime soon, Sunny had to reluctantly change his behavior. He shared everything he knew about Mordred with Cassia and learned everything she remembered about the Night Temple in return. Surprising what time locked in a cell and nothing better to do could do to bring back a bit of trust. Perhaps it was just because it gave them both something to do. With nothing else to do but teach each other, they went over every little detail many times over, only to end up with nothing. No new clues, no deeper understanding, not even a good guess or two. It was simply a dead end. For now. On the seventh day, the three lost arrived as usual. The sentinel walked forward and threw the tubes of synth paste into the cage, while the other two assumed defensive positions behind his back. Their eyes seemed dark and hollow. However, before Sunny could toss the empty water skin outside, a chilling scream suddenly resounded in the corridor outside the door. A long, drowning shriek echoed from the cold stones, full of torment and indescribable agony. How could a human throat produce such a sound? The lost tensed and gripped their weapons, one of them taking an involuntary step back. The sentinel snarled and pushed the man in the back.
Get a hold of yourself, cowards. Remember your duty.
With that, he threw the water skin to Sunny and rushed outside, a slender sword appearing in his hand from a whirlpool of dancing sparks of light. The others gritted their teeth and followed, shutting the door behind them. The flame of the oil lamp trembled. On the next day, when the door opened again, only two lost walked through it. One of the surviving lost looked like a walking corpse. There were no wounds on his body, but his eyes were dull and glassy. He glanced at Sunny and Cassia lifelessly, then turned around and raised his weapon, staring at the open door with tired eyes. He tossed the tubes of synth paste and the water inside the cage, not even waiting for Sunny to return the other two water skins. Sunny wanted to try to get the lost to speak to him again, as usual, but then thought better of it. There was a sharp edge in the man's eyes that made the idea of pushing him even a little seem too dangerous. The two lost left, leaving the prisoners alone again. Sunny stared at the door and the orange flame of the oil lamp dancing beside it for a few minutes, then shivered and turned away. Their jailers returned several more times. With each day, they looked more disheveled and exhausted, the darkness in their eyes growing deeper and deeper. A few times, Sonny could hear strange, disturbing sounds coming from the corridor, but the two lost did not seem to react to them at all. A week later, the food did not arrive for an especially long time. Sonny glared gloomily at the door, feeling pangs of hunger torment his empty stomach. 1 tube of synth paste a day was not nearly enough to satiate him, so he was always hungry, just like he had been in the past, living on the streets in the outskirts. Hours passed, but the two lost were nowhere to be seen.
Where the hell are they?
Then, something suddenly crashed into the door from the outside with a loud bang. A bit of dust fell from the ceiling, and then everything became silent once more. Sonny remained motionless for a few moments, then slowly looked down. Something was flowing from beneath the door, streaming down the slope of the dome toward the cage. In the dim orange glow of the oil lantern, the liquid seemed almost black. But he knew its smell too well. Blood. It was human blood. After that day, no one came to feed them anymore. Sonny looked at the stream of blood that was getting closer and closer to the cage, then glanced back at the door and waited, wondering if someone or something would burst through it and enter the cell. But nothing did. After that first loud bang, everything stayed eerily quiet. Seconds passed, then minutes. Finally, he slowly turned away from the door and looked at Cassia.
Do you smell it?
She lingered for a moment, then nodded.
Blood.
Sonny remained motionless for a bit, then walked back to his usual place and sat down. His face was grim. After a while, he said in a dark tone,
We are going to need to start rationing water.
Humans could survive for a long time without food, but water was much more precious. Without it, a healthy human could die in a matter of days. The mental strain of the thirst was just as dangerous too, and there were very few more agonizing ways to go. Cassia turned her head, then asked somberly,
Why? Do you think that they are going to just leave us here?
Sonny opened his mouth to retort that she was the one who could see the future, but in the end, he held his tongue. Now was not the time.
Just in case.
They had one full water skin left. As awakened, they would also be able to last longer without water than mundane humans, especially Sonny, whose body was strengthened by 3 cores, Bloodweave, and his shadows. But would that be enough? There was no way to know. He closed his eyes and exhaled slowly. Then tried to meditate. Time crawled slowly. Their hunger grew, but no one came to bring them food. With their last connection to the outside world gone, it was impossible to tell what day it was. Sonny and Cassia remained in the barely illuminated darkness alone, waiting for something to happen, or sleeping while shivering from the cold. It wasn't long before their water ran out. The water skin wasn't that large to begin with. Then came the thirst. Sonny thought that he knew what madness felt like, but after spending several days, at least, he thought that a few had passed, without drinking anything, he learned that there was a completely different realm of crazed delirium. The feeling of thirst was absolutely maddening, torturous, and suffocating. His throat hurt as if it was being cut. His lips had dried and cracked, and so did his tongue. His head was full of pulsating pain, and his muscles were experiencing excruciating cramps. All he could think about was water, water, water. Sonny glanced up at the runes. They still glowed, as if taunting him. Those damned runes. Would the thirst have been held off longer if they weren't active? If they weren't there at all? He was awakened, but they were pulling away at his and Cassia's essence, draining them of the resources that could help them hold on a bit longer. But now, Sonny felt drained, in every sense of the word. It was a torturous feeling. He felt so powerless. He wondered, had Cassia seen this? Had she lied to him? But what would she gain from that? She was stuck in here the same as him. Sonny shook his head. Thoughts like that were dangerous. It was one thing to be losing it physically, but if he lost his sanity, what then? If he was a husk of a person, even if he gained his essence back, if his mind was lost? No. He couldn't think about that. Not now. The worst part of it all, however, was the fear. Fear that he was going to die in this cursed cage like a dog, forgotten and discarded. Maybe one day, someone would open the heavy door and find his desiccated corpse reaching hopelessly and pathetically toward it through the iron bars. Sonny had tried everything he could think of to get out of the cage, but nothing he had done helped. The only result was that his condition worsened even further. By then, his throat and mouth felt as though they were on fire, and his entire body ached terribly. He felt weak and lethargic, and his vision was starting to blur. Sonny spent most of his time staring at the orange flame of the oil lamp because it was more or less the only thing he could see clearly. Then, it disappeared too. The stone cell became even darker, with only the ghostly dim glow of the runes illuminating the iron bars of the cage. The oil ran out. Sonny closed his eyes. Was it really hopeless? No. He couldn't give up. He refused to. In all this suffering and despair, the only thing that kept him somewhat sane was the fact that Cassia was right there with him, going through the same hell. At least he wasn't alone. Despite all the complicated emotions and the heavy burden of past sins, sharing his pain with someone had made this, if not bearable, then at least a little easier. Neither of them would have been able to endure the agony and the terror of not knowing whether they were going to live or die, the fear of the unknown, alone. But together, the two of them managed to persevere, somehow. Maybe just to not let the other see them break first. You... Sonny grimaced from how dry his mouth and vocal cords felt. It was like they were being rubbed by sandpaper. You don't have any visions anymore, right? Cassia nodded. She coughed and cringed from the pain. I haven't seen a thing. She started to giggle, but dissolved into a coughing fit. Sonny wondered if her sanity was also hanging on by threads, but he didn't want to push the matter. Not now. Sonny didn't know how many days had passed since the flame of the oil lantern died out. Time lost its meaning a while ago. All he knew was the thirst, the pain, and the stubborn, spiteful will to hold on just a little bit longer. At some point, he opened his eyes in the darkness and stared at the blurry blue glow of the sorceress runes. Then, he turned his head and looked at Cassia, who was sleeping in his arms. There was a sound coming from behind the door. Sonny wanted to tell Cassia to wake up, but his throat was so dry that no sound came out of it. All it did was bring him more pain. He gritted his teeth, then shook her gently, waited for her to open her eyes, and carefully placed a finger on her lips. He wanted her to remain quiet. The blind girl hesitated for a few moments, then nodded. They let go of each other and shakily rose to their feet. By that point, the faint sound became more clear. It was as though something sharp was scraping against stones as it was being dragged across them slowly. The haunting, grating sound was drawing closer and closer. Finally, it reached just beyond the cell and stopped abruptly. Then, they heard another scrape, this one much smaller, and the click of the door's lock. It opened, and Sonny saw a blurry silhouette standing at the threshold of the stone chamber. Half blinded by the thirst, he couldn't tell who or what it was. But the smell of blood was back. Only now, it was much, much stronger. Sonny stood motionlessly, gathering whatever strength he had left, which was far too little. Cassia was silent too, a tense expression on her pale face. With his vision compromised, and his shadow sense limited to the circle of runes glowing around the cage, all Sonny could see was a blurry silhouette. He was almost sure that it was a human. However, something about the dark figure was wrong. Utterly, terribly wrong. A strong smell of blood assaulted his nostrils. The silhouette swayed and then took a step forward. The scraping sound resounded once again, coming from it. Sonny strained his eyes and thought that he had noticed a slender sword being dragged behind the person. A hint of recognition appeared in his clouded mind, but in the next moment, a sudden burst of creaky, gurgling laughter threw his thoughts into a spin. Sonny shivered. That voice. The silhouette took another step forward, coming to the point where the flat surface of the floor gave way to the downward slope of the dome. Coincidentally, that was the moment when the dim glow of the runes finally reached it. Sonny flinched. Curses. A familiar face was looming in the darkness above him. Even through the haze clouding his sight, Sonny managed to recognize the arrogant sentinel who had locked them in this cage a long, long time ago. Only now, that cold and handsome man was nowhere to be seen. Instead, he looked broken and gaunt, his face contorted in a demented grin. But much worse than that. In the place where the sentinel's eyes used to be, 2 bloody pits were gaping, crimson streams flowing down his cheeks like tears. His fingers were marred with blood, too. As Sonny recoiled, the Lost laughed again, and then suddenly clawed at his face, his laughter turning into a stifled groan, and then into a whisper.
Can't get me anymore. Can't get me. I tricked him.
Then, the lunatic abruptly froze. Slowly, his head turned, and the bloody pits of his eyes stared directly at the cage. A moment later, a grimace of hatred appeared on his face.
You. It's all your fault. Yours. You let him free.
Sonny felt weak and barely able to stand, and he was suffering too much to have any energy for fear. It was obvious that the Sentinel had returned to exact revenge and kill them. But he didn't mind. Instead, he welcomed it.
Good. Come here then. Just come here and open the door. You can try to kill me all you want. Just open the damn door, you wretch.
As long as the door was open, they could escape. The Lost swayed again, then made a move to step forward, and stopped. His sword fell to the floor.
Damn you.
Instead, a whirlpool of sparks swirled around his hands, and a curved bow appeared in them. Sonny's heart grew cold.
No.
The Sentinel whispered,
Die, vermin.
With that, he drew the string of the bow. As soon as he did, a ghostly arrow appeared on it, its tip long and sharp as a razor. Sonny held his breath and stared at the tip of the arrow, then slowly turned his head and looked at Cassia, who stood motionlessly beside him. His face grew solemn.
Don't make a sound. Please, don't make a sound.
A moment later, he heard the sound of the string and saw the arrow streak above the blind girl's shoulder, the wind throwing a few strands of her hair into the air and shattering against the stones. Cassia flinched, but remained silent. The Sentinel frowned.
Alive. I know that you are still alive, but not for long now.
He drew the bow again and sent another ghostly arrow flying. This time, it flew mere centimeters above Sonny's head. For the first time in his life, he felt thankful for his short stature. But the crazed Lost wasn't done. Sonny turned his head and stared directly at him. A ghostly smile suddenly appeared on the Sentinel's face.
Got you now.
He drew the bow again, and then lowered it, aiming directly at Sonny's heart. Sonny did not move a muscle. A moment before the Lost released the string, something small and swift suddenly dashed toward him from behind and bit his leg ferociously. It was the covetous coffer. Back when everything started, Sonny had left it in the interrogation room on purpose. He couldn't control a memory like he could an echo, but the coffer was still able to follow simple commands. The command it had received from Sonny in those moments was to hide, and then find him, and then wait. The poor thing must have loitered near the locked door of the cell for several weeks, hiding every time anyone approached, and now it was finally able to receive a new command. Sunny concentrated on the shadowy form of the small trunk.
Attack!
The box scurried from its hiding place, reached the cell, and ran through the door on its 8 short iron legs, just in time to sink its sharp triangular teeth into the sentinel's heel. They easily pierced the steel of his armored boot. Blood spurted into the air, and with a surprised shriek, the man stumbled forward, fell, and rolled down the slope of the dome, crashing into the bars of the cage. The arrow flashed past Sunny, missing him by a hair's breadth. But he didn't care, already moving. As soon as the damage was done, Sunny dismissed the covetous coffer, and before the runes could devour the tiny amount of shadow essence returned to him by that act, sent all of it into his hurting muscles. And now, he was dashing up the slope toward where the Lost was trying to get back to his feet. Before he could, however, Sunny was already upon him. He thrust his hands through the bars, wrapped one arm around the man's neck, pressed him against the cage, and used the other hand to lock him into a stranglehold. Sunny was weakened by the runes, the hunger, and the thirst, but he still had 3 cores and 3 shadows wrapped around his body. His strength was fueled by fury, desperation, and cold, murderous will. The 2 men struggled furiously, one trying to break free, the other trying to squeeze the very life out of his enemy. Sunny used everything he had, and then a bit more, strangling the Lost with all the strength he had left in his gaunt, starved body. He knew that there was not going to be another chance. He had to kill this man to survive. And even more important than that, he simply wanted to. So he bit his lip, feeling drops of blood flowing into his dry mouth, and pulled. After what felt like an eternity, when his vision had gone almost entirely black, and his muscles were on the verge of collapsing, he felt something snap under his grip, and then the body of his enemy suddenly grew limp. The sentinel was dead. Sunny let out a shaky breath, letting go of the man's corpse, and fell back, sliding down to the center of the dome. He couldn't stand up anymore. In truth, he couldn't even open his eyes. Not that he would be able to see anything. The fight had taken the last of his strength. His chest rose and fell, every breath sending a wave of agony through his body. He didn't think that he could move.
I'm done.
Through the haze, Sunny heard someone walk unsteadily past him, and sometime later, a loud click. Then, 2 small, weak hands grabbed him by the shoulders, and Sunny felt himself being dragged across the cold stones. He didn't quite understand what was happening. However, soon, his whole body shuddered, and a dark grin slowly appeared on his face. A raging, revitalizing flood of shadow essence was flowing into his 3 cores. He was free. Sunny remained motionless for a while, then took a look into his soul sea. It didn't seem lifeless and drained anymore. The 3 black suns of his cores loomed above in a perfect triangle, burning with furious dark flames. And the tranquil sea was in turmoil, filling with raging energy. He glanced at the shadow of the sentinel that had joined the silent ranks of his brethren, made a grimace, and closed his eyes. His body was still weak and on the verge of shutting down, but now, satiated with essence, it was not completely useless anymore. He concentrated, then summoned the soul serpent and circulated the essence through its coils, feeling strength return to his aching muscles. His lethargy receded a little. Finally, Sonny opened his eyes and turned his head to look at Cassia. The blind girl was laying on the floor beside him, just outside the circle of runes, completely spent. She must have retrieved the keys from the sentinel's corpse, unlocked the door, and then dragged Sonny out of the cage. Sonny didn't know how she had managed to carry him all this way in her terrible condition, but she had, anyway. Now, Cassia was barely breathing, but the color was slowly returning to her face. She was regenerating her soul essence too. Just the effort of turning his head made Sonny feel dizzy. He rested for a few moments, breathing heavily, then summoned the saint. The taciturn knight appeared out of his shadow, her ruby eyes burning in the darkness. He stared at her from below for a second, then gave a silent command.
Close the door. Guard us.
The demon silently turned and walked away, her steps echoing in the silence of the stone cell. Sonny rested some more, then gritted his teeth and tried to sit up. He succeeded on the third try. Water. Water. He needed water. All of his being lusted for a single drop of the precious liquid. A swirl of sparks danced around his hand, and then the most glorious thing he had ever seen appeared in it. It was a dazzling, beautiful, sublime bottle made out of patterned blue glass. Sonny paused for a few moments, just staring at the blue glass. He almost couldn't believe it was there, in his hands. Then he crawled closer to Cassia, held up her head, and brought the endless spring to her cracked lips. As soon as the first drops of water fell into her mouth, the blind girl opened her eyes, flinched, and then drank greedily. At some point, she raised one hand and grabbed his own, as if afraid that he would take the bottle away. Sonny observed her, his own throat spasming in pain. Finally, he wrestled his hand free and drank his own share. The cold water was, without a shadow of a doubt, the sweetest and most magnificent thing he had ever tasted. Drinking it was more euphoric than being reborn during the awakening, and much more rewarding by far. With each sip, he could feel life returning into his tortured body, as if he was rising from the dead. In these moments, he was probably the happiest he had ever been. It wasn't long before they fell asleep. When Sonny woke up, he felt much better. He was still in rather bad shape and weak from hunger, his stomach pulsing with pain, but at least not dying anymore. He sat up, drank more water, and looked around the cell. Cassia was still sound asleep, laying on the cold stone floor. She looked to be in worse condition than him, but there was color to her face, and her breathing was calm and steady. Even though the blind girl did not possess the miraculous bloodweave, she was still a powerful awakened. Her body was much more resilient and quicker to heal than that of a mundane human, even without food, though that would certainly help things along. Sonny's stomach growled, but he tried to ignore it while he got his bearings and regained his ability to even think straight. Sonny suspected that in a couple of days, both of them would be mostly back to normal, provided that nothing else happened. But what were the chances of that? He glanced at the saint, who was guarding the heavy door, then at the cage and the corpse of the sentinel laying near it. His face became contorted by a grimace of disgust. Sonny sighed, then closed his eyes and sent one of his shadows to take a look outside the door. The long corridor was empty and submerged in darkness. Nothing moved there, and nothing seemed to pose any threat. The only thing he saw was another corpse, this one belonging to the partner of the dead sentinel. Sprawled near the cell, terribly mangled and in the early stages of decomposition. Sonny stared at it for a while, then commanded the shadow to return. The silence outside was almost eerie. At that moment, Cassia stirred and opened her eyes. She sat down and groaned quietly, then slowly turned her head in his direction. Her second aspect ability must have returned, or maybe she just located him by the smell. After weeks spent in the iron cage, both of them reeked terribly enough to scare away a pack of hungry wolves. Sonny handed her the endless spring, stared at the bottle in the delicate hand of the blind girl for a few moments, then turned away. Cassia drank the water, coughed, then returned the memory, and asked, her voice raspy,
"What are we going to do now?"
Sonny thought about that for a moment. Then he shrugged.
"Let's focus on the most important thing. First, we need to find some food. Once we are full and strong enough to fight, we'll see. Gather information, assess the situation, then act."
It felt a bit silly to say that, but he wasn't wrong. If they didn't get some food, their recovery would take a hell of a lot longer. They needed their strength, and they needed it fast. She nodded, then slowly rose to her feet.
"You didn't happen to have any stashed away in that moving treasure chest of yours?"
Sonny frowned, shaking his head.
"No."
He was annoyed at himself for not having food stocked up in there. But even if it was, all of those days locked in the cage, it would have spoiled by now. The quiet dancer appeared in Cassia's hand in the glow of white sparks. She nodded at Sonny, ready to do what was needed. Sonny stood up too and headed toward the door. Venturing out of the room, he desperately wanted to put it behind him, but he didn't know what fresh hell lurked beyond the corridor his shadow was able to scout for him. The saint moved aside, allowing him to open it. Standing at the threshold, he hesitated for a few seconds, and then took a step forward. A dark expression appeared on his face. Sonny knew that he had to be careful, but he also felt entitled to some vengeance of his own. He willed his soul serpent into a dagger. It wasn't much, but it was enough for now. He just needed something in his hand to be ready. He had a sinking suspicion Mordred was still skulking through the halls. It was only a matter of time before he found him. Stepping over the corpse laying at the doorstep of their cell, Sonny and Cassia entered the dark, empty corridor and stopped for a few short moments. They listened tensely to the echoing silence that reigned over it, and then cautiously moved forward. Most humans would have felt lost in the impenetrable darkness, but neither of them found it uncomfortable. Stepping softly, they walked toward the entrance to the closest stairwell, the shadows gliding ahead of them to scout for potential dangers. Sonny didn't let the shadows go too far, though, knowing that he might need their help at a moment's notice. In the past weeks, he had learned everything that Cassia knew about the Night Temple, so there was a clear mental picture of its interior in his head. the parts of the great cathedral that she had been familiar with at least. Currently, they were at the lowest levels of one of its 7 belfries, deep below the outward ring of the main structure. There were 2 other belfries in the outward ring, and both the ring itself and the 3 towers descending from it remained uninhabited. They were mostly empty or occupied by storage rooms, workshops, and other facilities the Lost used to maintain the Citadel. Still, there was no way of knowing what might have changed inside the temple since their imprisonment, and what danger lay ahead in the darkness. They moved from one level to another, not meeting a single soul. Here and there, signs of an old battle could be seen. The furniture was smashed to pieces, the walls scraped by sharp blades or cracked, a few of them completely shattered. The floor was stained with blood, but there were no more corpses around. All they found were a clump of torn, bloodied clothes and several overturned tables, as though someone had desperately tried to build a barricade. Whoever it had been, it didn't seem as though they succeeded. The makeshift barricade was broken, and there was a lot of blood on the floor, the walls, and even the ceiling behind it. Sunny and Cassia walked past, their expressions turning somber. After a while, Sunny finally discovered a storage room full of wooden crates behind one of the locked doors, each containing hundreds of tubes of synth paste. His mouth instantly watered. Food. No matter how much he hated the muddy sludge, right now, he was ready to kill for a single mouthful. Sunny and Cassia opened the storage room with one of the keys attached to the keyring they had picked up from the body of the sentinel, entered it, and then locked the door behind them. Both of them were starving, but before Cassia had a chance to grab a tube, Sunny stopped her. Don't eat more than one, and eat it slowly. She hesitated, then turned to him with a frown. Why? I'm so hungry. He shook his head and sat down on one of the crates. If you eat too much too quickly after going without food for a long time, you might die. The girl tilted her head. What? Why? How do you know? Sunny opened a tube and shrugged. Seen it happen. That was just general knowledge among the street kids in the outskirts. However, Cassia had probably never faced real hunger. Even in the Dark City, the inhabitants of the outer settlement had been fed generously by Changing Star and her hunting party during her time there. Sunny was surprised, actually, that normal children didn't learn about such stuff in school. Cassia lingered for a few moments, but listened to his advice in the end. Each of them slowly ate one tube of synth paste, and then rested for a while. After that, Sunny summoned the covetous coffer, patted it on the lid, and loaded a couple of crates into the small box. What a good little box you are. Good job, coffer. Then, feeling refreshed and energized, the strength slowly returning to their starved bodies, they moved the crates around and took turns washing themselves with the help of the endless spring. Sunny went first, taking off the reeking clothes and scrubbing his skin with cold water felt heavenly. When he was done, he summoned the undying chain and finally felt like himself again. After that, he sat by the door quietly and, using one of the shadows, kept watch on the corridor outside. In the dead silence on the stone belfry, Sunny couldn't help but hear every sound around him. The rustle of the crude tunic against Cassia's skin as she took it off and dropped it on the ground. The murmur of the water as it flowed down her petite, supple body. And the small sighs of relief she made as the weight of several weeks of imprisonment was washed away by it. After a while, she joined him, clad once again in her blue coat and polished armor. Sunny hesitated for a bit, then said,
"Come closer."
Cassia tilted her head a little, then did as he told her. Sunny reached toward one of the extinguished oil lamps and then proceeded to rub her cuirass, pauldron, and other steel elements of the armor with soot. The blind girl frowned, but didn't stop him.
Are you trying to make it non-reflective?
He nodded.
Yeah, just in case.
They still didn't know what powers Mordred possessed, but whatever they were, mirrors and reflections obviously had something to do with it. The undying chain was forged out of bleak steel, but Cassia's armor was too lustrous for him to feel at ease. That was also the reason why he had not summoned the cruel sight yet. The silver blade of the enchanted spear was like a clear mirror, and he wasn't sure what might happen if he did. After Sunny was done covering up the polished steel of Cassia's armor with soot, they rested for a while, ate a little more, and left the storage room behind. It was time to ascend the belfry and return to the outward ring of the Night Temple. As soon as they stepped out of the stairwell and found themselves between the black walls of the main structure of the Night Temple again, a terrible smell assaulted their nostrils. Sunny grimaced and then covered his nose with a hand. This was the familiar, vile smell of death. Just like the belfry, the outward ring was submerged in darkness. No one had bothered to change the oil in the lamps, and there were no windows to let in the light. The corridors were wider, and their adornments richer. However, just like before, everything was silent, and there was nobody around. Sunny shivered.
Just where is everyone?
The Night Temple seemed completely deserted. At first, when they had been hungry and weak, he was glad for it. But now, the absence of people was starting to make him nervous. What the hell had happened here while they were locked up? Moving slowly, the two of them cautiously headed in the direction of the gates leading to the outside. It wasn't long before Sunny noticed a trail of dried blood on the stones beneath his feet, as though someone dead or dying had been dragged across them. Coincidentally, the trail led in the same direction. Soon, the smell of death grew stronger, making it hard to breathe. Sunny and Cassia entered the hall, separating them from the gates, and froze. His face darkened.
That is not good.
Before the gates of the temple, a large hall stood, submerged in darkness. The air was permeated with the smell of rot, and at least a dozen eviscerated bodies lay on the cold stones, staring into nothingness with their empty eyes. Sunny had long become accustomed to such sights, so he wasn't too bothered by it. The implication, however, left him feeling cold.
Damnation.
He entered the hall, both Saint and the Serpent emerging silently from his shadows. Cassia followed, gripping the hilt of the quiet dancer so hard that her fingers turned white. Sunny walked over to the nearest corpse, held his breath, and knelt beside it, studying its wounds. Then, with a grim expression, he moved over to the next one and did the same. It took him some time to check on each of the slain lost, and by the end, his eyes were full of darkness. Cassia remained silent for a few moments, then turned to him, her voice tense and trembling.
How did they die?
He lingered for a second, then shook his head.
Sword wounds.
Each of the fallen sentinels was killed with one precise fatal strike. However, most of them were terribly mutilated and covered in multiple wounds, none of them lethal, but all aimed at inflicting the maximum amount of pain. The killer, whoever it was, wanted his victims to suffer before they died. Well, Sonny was pretty sure that he knew who the killer was. Mordred, the man, or thing, that he had set free. It seemed that the Prince of Nothing had a sadistic streak about him. But that wasn't the problem. From everything that Sonny had learned before, he assumed that Mordred possessed a bizarre and powerful aspect that allowed him to deal either mind or soul damage to other living beings. That made him extremely dangerous. The prerequisite for this ability seemed to be looking the prisoner of the Night Temple in the eyes, which was good since both Sonny and Cassia could naturally counter it. Sonny by fighting with his eyes closed, Cassia simply by being blind. However, these lost had clearly died in a ferocious and bloody melee. That meant that on top of everything else, Mordred was a fighter of incredible skill. Skilled and powerful enough to not only kill a dozen experienced awakened with a sword, but also to play with his victims before he did. Just how was Sonny supposed to win against someone like that? He sighed, then walked past the corpses and approached the gate. Master Welty had told them that the citadel was sealed and no one except for St. Cormac would be able to open it. However, Sonny had to check for himself. He wrapped all 3 shadows around his body and tried to push open the gates. But to no avail. The heavy doors didn't budge even when Saint joined him. None of the keys their jailers had carried were of any use, too. There wasn't even a keyhole to insert them. Sonny looked beneath the surface of the gates, hoping to see the same type of primitive weave he had seen in the door of the Ebony Tower, but there was none.
Curse it.
He gave the gates a good kick, then turned around and walked back to Cassia in frustration.
I guess we aren't getting out of here until the Saint arrives.
Which would happen in a week at the earliest. Would they even be able to survive that long? The blind girl frowned, then asked with uncertainty,
"Where to, then?"
Sonny thought for a few seconds. Since they were already stuck in this damned place, why not try and accomplish the task they had come here to complete in the first place?
Let's go check on the gateway.
Perhaps the ivory knife was still there somewhere. Leaving the scene of the cruel massacre behind, the 2 of them headed deeper into the stone bowels of the Night Temple. It took them a long time to cross the outward ring and enter the central temple. The distance itself was not that considerable, but the bizarre interior of the cathedral was disorienting and sprawling, resembling a vast convoluted maze of black stone. They also had to remain cautious and move slowly, so as to not walk into an ambush. The darkness, silence, and eerie emptiness of the deserted citadel were slowly stretching their already tense nerves. Both Sonny and Cassia had not recovered from their ordeal completely, so they had to stop and rest a couple of times, drinking water and eating small amounts of synth paste. They also encountered more morbid remnants of the struggle that had been going on inside the Night Temple while they were slowly dying inside the cage, rotting corpses of the lost, signs of bloodshed and destruction, as well as things that were too strange and vile to be explained by any kind of sane logic. It was as though they were traveling through the workshop of a mad butcher. With each minute that passed, Sonny grew more and more grim. For the first time since this whole disaster started, he actually began to question the moral implications of what his actions had led to. Even if he had been an unwilling accomplice, Mordred only managed to escape because of him. Had Sunny accidentally released an unspeakable evil upon the world? He wasn't sure how to feel about that. On one hand, he didn't really care about the world, but on the other hand, Sunny didn't like to leave behind a mess without cleaning it up. It was just basic decency. A bit conflicted, he sent the shadow ahead, made sure that everything was fine, and finally led Cassia into the grand hall of the Night Temple. This place was both magnificent and uncanny. It was vast and full of darkness, reminding him of his home in the Dark City. The only difference was that this tenumbrous cathedral was built upside down. Far above them, the ceiling was flat and stretched into the distance. The floor, on the contrary, arched downward like a giant bowl, with load-bearing stone seams protruding from it like bridges and roads. The hall was silent and somber, and absolutely empty. In its center, there was a wide stone platform. It was covered in rubble, large pieces of black obsidian laying in piles where the black altar had once stood.
They really destroyed it.
Sunny stared at the shattered altar, still not quite believing that the gateway was really obliterated. What madness was this? They lingered for a few moments, then descended toward the platform. There, Sunny spent some time sifting through the rubble, hoping to find the ivory knife, but it was nowhere to be found. All he found was broken obsidian and pieces of Storm God's shattered statue. Either the knife had never been there to begin with, or Mordred had gotten to it first.
Curse it!
Sunny turned the head of the statue, looked beneath it, and then stood up, staring into the empty eyes of the dead goddess with dark fury.
Damned liar! A prince of lies! That's who he is!
As he was boiling with rage, Cassia suddenly took a step forward and touched him on the shoulder. Then, she pointed toward the other end of the grand hall and whispered,
I hear footsteps. Someone is coming.
Sunny stared into the darkness, his hand itching to summon a weapon. His eyes gleamed dangerously.
Let them come.
Sunny was tired of the silence, the emptiness, and the quiet dread. The fear of the unknown had been pressing heavily onto his heart, and for a short moment, he wanted this burdensome uncertainty to end, no matter how violent and dangerous the resulting confrontation would be. But then, he had to grit his teeth and remind himself that giving in to anger and frustration was a sure way to die. Without knowing the scale of the threat, he had to remain calm and keep a cool head. His hand, already outstretched to summon a weapon, hovered in the air for a couple of moments and then relaxed. Sunny sent one of his shadows forward and soon saw human figures emerging from one of the passages, some of them limping, the others carrying stretchers with those of their brethren who were too heavily wounded to walk. The lost. They were the remaining guardians of the Night Temple. In front of them, a woman in a black tunic was walking, her red hair dirty and damp with sweat. There was a grim, dark expression on her face.
So, there are survivors after all.
There were a dozen or so warriors who could still fight, although they didn't seem to be in the best shape. Several were carrying lanterns and torches, the orange flames pushing the darkness reigning in the great hall back. They were still too far away to notice Sunny and Cassia, but he had no doubt that they would be discovered soon.
What to do? What to do? Wait or hide?
A moment later, the decision was made for him. As Sunny watched, one of the lost suddenly approached Master Welty and whispered something to her, then pointed directly at the shadow that was observing them from the darkness.
Crap.
Sonny was more or less certain in his ability to contend with one of the Ascended Knights, provided, of course, that Saint and the Serpent were on his side. With the dozen lost supporting the opponent, though, it was a fight he would have preferred to avoid, especially considering that what he needed the most right now was information, which the survivors possessed. Soon, a lone figure separated from the group of battered sentinels and headed their way with measured, steady steps. As soon as Sonny saw who it was, his face darkened. Master Pierce. The man was as rugged and severe as he had been when they first met. His steely eyes cold and hard. The stubble on his cheeks had turned into a short beard, and his lusterless scale mail was damaged in several places. But other than that, he looked exactly the same. It was as though the weeks of bloody horror had no effect on him at all. Now, the odds were really not in Sonny's favor. He was still sure of his ability to at least escape, though, if need be. Master Pierce approached the central platform and stopped, studying Sonny and Cassia with a heavy gaze. Sonny cleared his throat and faked a shaky smile.
Sir Pierce, thank the gods. We weren't sure that anyone was left alive.
To his left, Cassia suddenly tensed. Knowing that she must have sensed something happening in the next few seconds, Sonny prepared for the worst. However, noting that the blind girl remained motionless, he didn't do anything rash. Master Pierce spoke, his voice dark and heavy.
Well, well, what do we have here?
In the next moment, a vast whirlwind of white sparks surrounded the platform. Sonny cursed inwardly and watched as 10 human figures appeared from the sparks surrounding them. In an instant, the number of their potential enemies almost doubled. These humans, though, he had to suppress a shiver. Their empty eyes, their empty shadows. No, they weren't humans at all. Instead, 10 echoes were staring at him with lifeless expressions, each radiating an eerie, deeply disturbing, and threatening aura. Pierce stared at them coldly.
I see that the two of you are still alive.
Sonny looked around, feverishly thinking about how to turn the situation around.
Oh, about that.
Before he could say anything, he noticed that Cassia turned her hand slightly and glanced somewhere behind him, a small frown appearing on her face. Just like that, he knew that someone was there, which was strange. Sonny was always aware of what was behind his back, thanks to the shadows, but he couldn't see or sense anything right now. Cassia was proven right, though, in the next moment, when something cold touched his neck, and a vaguely familiar raspy voice spoke into his ear.
Don't move.
Sonny froze.
That voice, the female sentinel that was guarding the gates on the day we arrived. Why can't I see her or sense her shadow?
The answer was rather obvious. The woman must have been able to do some form of invisibility thanks to her aspect. That was one nasty ability. He pretended to tremble.
Yes, I'm not moving.
For a couple of moments, no one spoke. Then, Cassia turned her face toward the fearsome master and said,
Sir Pierce, I would appreciate it if you could give us shelter and explain what is happening. We barely escaped the cage you put us in alive, and being met with such hostility is not how we imagined finding fellow humans again.
He stared at her for a bit, then grinned.
Give you shelter. That is a good joke. Give me one reason not to kill you both instead.
Cassia frowned, but did not show any fear. Instead, she remained silent for a few seconds, and then said in a calm and even voice,
You can try. You will certainly succeed, but not without paying a cost. Awakened Sunless and I might not be ascended, but we did not receive our designations for nothing. How many of your men and echoes will we take to hell with us?
She paused for a moment, and then added,
How many can you spare?
Master Pierce opened his mouth, wishing to say something, but was cut off by Welty, who had approached from behind. The second Ascended spoke in a tired voice.
Enough. We can't spare anyone or anything. I know this, and you do too, Pierce. These two are strong. They will be of use to us. We will take them with us.
Pierce grimaced.
What if that thing is hiding in one of them?
Lady Welty glanced at Sunny and Cassia and shook her head.
They have been locked in the lesser cell for weeks. Between all of us, these two are the least likely to have been taken. Besides, we have just destroyed his previous vessel. There are no mirrors in the Great Hall, so...
She sighed heavily, then addressed Cassia.
Come, it is not safe here. We must return to the inner sanctum as fast as possible.
Pierce gritted his teeth, then snarled and dismissed the echoes. At the same time, Sunny felt the cold blade move away from his neck. In the next moment, the familiar sentinel appeared from thin air beside him, holding a sharp dagger in her hand. She smiled and winked at him.
Lucky you. Maybe next time.
With that, the woman headed toward the group of the lost and beckoned for them to follow. Sunny briefly glanced at Cassia, sighed, and started walking. He wasn't too happy about how things had turned out and knew that their conflict with the forces of Valor was not over. But for now, at least, there seemed to be a shaky truce between them, which gave him an opportunity to get some answers. The lost entered the inner sanctum of the Night Temple, its very heart, and bolted the heavy doors behind them. As soon as they did, a field of glowing runes flashed for a moment on the dark wooden surface, and then disappeared without a trace. Sunny glanced at the door with a frown, but didn't say anything. Cassia had never been to this part of the Citadel, so neither of them had any information about what was inside. The area was not too large, but right below them was the main bell tower of the cathedral, which was taller and wider than the other 6 belfries. The 2 masters led their people through somber corridors to a spacious hall that seemed to serve as their current stronghold. There were guards keeping watch in front of the entrance, crates with food and water, a fireplace keeping the cold at bay, and makeshift bedding for people to sleep on. Just from looking at the number of cots, Sunny understood that not everyone had returned from their last hunt, or whatever it was that the Sentinels had tried to accomplish. All in all, 23 lost remained, some of them heavily wounded. With Pierce, Welty, and the 2 of them, there were less than 30 humans left to oppose the Mad Prince. That meant that in several weeks, Mordred had eviscerated more than 2/3 of the temple's defenders. Remembering how confident Master Welty had been in their ability to contain the prisoner at the start of all this, Sunny couldn't help but shake his head and felt a deep stab of guilt in his gut. Mordred turned out to be more lethal and terrifying than even his jailers had expected. He was part of what brought this upon them. It was unwittingly done, but still. He hadn't even considered bringing the cruel sight with him. But why would he? But what was done was done. Now he just had to move on and figure out how to survive the Mad Prince. The wounded were quickly tended to, and the lost fell on their cots, dead tired. A few went through the familiar motions of maintaining the camp, cooking food, distributing water, and doing other miscellaneous tasks. Everything was performed swiftly, with trained precision, proving once more how experienced and professional these people were. They were obviously fatigued, both mentally and physically, but not nearly as beaten and unsteady as Sonny had thought. Their spirits were not broken, perhaps because only those with the strongest wills had survived. He also couldn't help but notice that there was not a single reflective surface in the whole of the inner sanctum. The lost wore either armor made out of leather or dull steel that didn't give off reflections, and even made sure to store and drink water from opaque containers, not letting a single drop fall to the floor. After a while, the familiar female sentinel approached them and said,
"Sir and lady wish to see you."
Sonny and Cassio were led to a separate room, where Pierce and Welty were waiting for them behind a wide round table. Both of their expressions were grim. Welty gestured to a couple of chairs. After waiting for a few moments, she finally spoke.
"The two of you will follow our rules. From now on, you are under our command. You will follow any order either Sir Pierce or I give you. You will not use any memory or item that can be used as a mirror inside the inner sanctum, or outside of it, if you wish to live. You will not conspire against your fellow soldiers or tell a single soul about what you have seen here in the Night Temple. If you disagree, leave right now."
Sonny and Cassia glanced at each other, but remained seated. How could they argue with that? They didn't have much of a choice.
"Leave now?"
Sonny thought, internally sneering, but keeping his face impassive and even somewhat afraid.
"How can we leave? Didn't they lock the gates and make sure the gate no longer works?"
Welty nodded and then looked at Sonny.
"Awakened Sunless, please describe how you came into possession of that piece of a broken mirror. This time, in detail."
Pierce suddenly leaned forward and growled,
"And don't even think about lying to us, boy. You won't like the result."
Sonny pretended to look at him with a bit of fear. His thoughts were as snarky as ever.
"I couldn't lie even if I wanted to, you fool."
His face held his terrified expression. He told the tale of how he had encountered the mirror beast on the Reckoning Island and almost lost his life to the strange creature. Knowing that he had to give up at least some valuable information, as well as explain how he had managed to defeat such a dangerous abomination, he shared the details about using the flaw of his aspect against the reflection. Well, not mentioning what that flaw was exactly, of course. Afterward, both masters were silent for a while. Finally, Welty spoke, her voice solemn.
"So, one of his reflections managed to escape after all. To think that it had been so close all this time."
Sonny hesitated, then cautiously asked,
"I am sorry, but what was this piece of mirror exactly? If it is so dangerous, why was I even allowed to bring it inside? Why didn't my memories get checked sooner?"
Pierce clenched his fists and stared at him with fury. Then he uttered through gritted teeth,
"The inspection was meant to prevent mundane mirrors from being brought into the Citadel. No one could have expected that there was one more fragment out there, much less expected them to be somewhere on the islands. If we knew, you would have been killed as soon as you set foot on our island. Had that little adventure of yours been known, you would have been hunted down. As for what that fragment was, it's not for you to know."
Sonny shivered slightly, realizing how big of a target he had drawn on himself by picking up the inconspicuous piece of mirror. No wonder St. Tyrus had warned him to never speak of visiting the Reckoning Island to anyone. Did she know how dangerous that piece of mirror was? Did she even know about the threat it posed? She didn't even ask to look at it. Would that have been dangerous for her? Or was the shard only a danger when brought here? And how was he supposed to have known? He felt a swirling of emotions that were only making choosing his next words trickier. Too many questions were lingering with no answers. While he was thinking that, Cassia finally spoke.
With all due respect, Sir Pierce, we have the right to know. Or, rather, we need to know. How are we supposed to fight against the threat if we don't know what it is? What exactly have we unleashed? What kind of creature is capable of causing so much death and destruction?
The master opened his mouth to spit a cold response. But Welty spoke first, her voice calm.
She is right, Pierce. They need to know if they are to be useful.
She sighed, then looked away and remained silent for a while. Then, Welty grimaced, rubbed her face, and said, her voice somber and grave,
The creature that you have unleashed, that monster, is Mordred of Valor, the Prince of War.
After that statement, the air in the room was thick with a tense silence. Sonny frowned, thinking about what he had just heard. Mordred of Valor, the Prince of War. He wasn't really surprised to learn that Mordred was a scion of the great clan Valor. He had already known that there was some connection there. He had also considered that one possible explanation for Mordred's strange insistence on calling himself a prince was a blood relation to one of the sovereign. Now, it was more or less clear that Anvil of Valor was the mysterious prince's father. What made Sonny frown, however, was that Welty called Mordred the Prince of War. Was that an indication that Clan Valor had inherited the lineage of War God? Just like the Immortal Flame clan inherited that of Sun God. If so, what lineages did the other two great clans possess? And where did it leave him, who was supposed to become the inheritor of Shadow God, but ended up stuck with a forbidden lineage of an elusive daemon instead? Meanwhile, Cassia spoke, her voice slightly surprised.
Of Valor?
Sonny bit his lip to suppress a smirk. He took some small pleasure in knowing she could still be surprised. Though, after spending over a week being drained and locked away from their powers, he supposed that left enough gaps for her to not know everything going on around them. At least, not yet. Master Welty sighed again, then nodded.
Yes, Prince Mordred is, the eldest son of Saint Anvil, one of the patriarchs of our great clan. As a young child, he was given as a hostage to a powerful ally, to keep peace and ensure prosperity for all. No harm was meant to come to him, and it didn't. Or so we thought. Years later, the prince was returned to us as a valiant awakened, to our joy and relief.
Pierce's face darkened, and he looked away. Welty paused for a few moments, and then continued.
But our joy was short-lived. Soon it became apparent that the boy had grown up to be disturbed. He was cruel, uncaring, and had certain impulses that couldn't be controlled. The more powerful he became, the less human he seemed. And he was powerful. Incredibly so. More powerful than any awakened was supposed to be.
She looked down, her face painted with echoes of a past grief.
In the end,
Prince Mordred left the clan and, breaking the command of the elders, sought out a seed of nightmare to become a master. Knowing that he was too dangerous to be allowed to ascend, or even to walk freely in the waking world, it was with a heavy heart that a decision was made to eliminate him. Monster or not, we had to do it. He was our responsibility after all.
Sonny rubbed his temples. There was a lot of new information in this story. Provided any of it was true, of course. He wasn't sure that it was. Had Mordred really been given away as a hostage? Was he really disturbed and dangerous? Maybe he was, and maybe he wasn't. Or had not been, at least. He was a child raised in captivity. Sonny clenched his jaw.
Did they think he would be raised as a prisoner and leave that environment unscathed?
Whatever the case, Sonny had no doubt that it had no bearing on Anvil's decision to get rid of his firstborn son. The key phrases in all the noble-sounding words Welty had spoken were too powerful and couldn't be controlled. Mordred had probably been forbidden from challenging the second nightmare for that very reason. That was why he had come to the Chained Isles alone, seeking a seed that had not been discovered, and thus couldn't be guarded by the forces of the Sovereigns. Which eventually led to his downfall. One thing, however, didn't make a lot of sense. Sonny glanced at the masters and then asked doubtfully,
If that Mordred was so dangerous, why didn't you just kill him? Why go to all this trouble and imprison him instead?
After a short pause, it was Pierce who answered, his voice grim.
Did you think we hadn't tried? His physical body was destroyed. His spirit body too. But that still didn't kill him. No matter what we attempted, that thing simply refused to die. Many of my comrades did in the process, however. In the end, we could only bind him. And even that was only possible with the help of the Saints.
Sonny stared at the fearsome master dumbfounded. His mind was swirling with curious thoughts.
Both his physical and spirit body were destroyed, and yet he still exists? How is that even possible?
He opened his mouth, then closed it, then opened it again.
What is his aspect exactly?
Pierce and Welty glanced at each other again. In the end, the woman spoke.
It has to do with mirrors, reflections, and souls. Prince Mordred is able to travel through mirrors and control the reflections. His second ability, though, is much more terrifying. If one looks at him through any form of a mirror, their soul will become devoured, and their body will become his. By taking a vessel, the prince inherits their memories, echoes, and even their aspect. But also their flaw, similar to the being you have encountered on the Reckoning Island, which was one of his creations.
She fell silent for a few moments, and absent-mindedly touched the amulet in the shape of an anvil hanging around her neck.
Pierce and I are immune to his powers. The rest of our soldiers, though, are not so fortunate. He had been taking one after another, using their bodies to kill the rest. The latest vessel of his was especially dangerous, since it possessed an aspect that allowed him to create puppets out of the dead bodies of our brothers and sisters. We managed to destroy the vessel, but the prince himself got away. Just like before. We weren't able to use the binding and imprison him again.
Sonny tilted his head a little. Now, finally, a lot of things had become clear. Why Mordred had been imprisoned, why the Night Temple was closed off to strangers, and why only the Echoes and the Lost were allowed to guard the prisoner. The former did not possess souls and couldn't be taken, while the latter could not return to the waking world even if the prince somehow escaped and took them as a vessel. Back in the waking world, catching him would be all but impossible. But what was more concerning was what Mordred would get up to on the other side. What havoc would he wreak? Suddenly, Sonny shivered. He remembered the lost guard whose eyes were gouged out. It all made sense now. A horrible, gruesome sense. Noticing his expression, Pierce grinned darkly. It was as if Sonny's masked expression hadn't fooled him before, not one bit.
I see you finally understand. Yes. Don't think that you can reason with that beast or make use of the fact that his hatred is aimed at Clan Valor, and not you. Currently, there are only 4 people in this citadel whose bodies can allow him to eventually return to the waking world. Welty and I cannot be taken, and neither can Lady Cassia due to her blindness, which leaves...
Master Pierce stared at him with his cold, dangerous eyes. Sonny cursed.
Shit.
Only you.
Well, that's just damn great.
Sonny thought bitterly. The corner of Sonny's mouth twitched. The worst part was that he couldn't even disagree with Pierce's reasoning, because his conclusion was more or less the same. Of course, Mordred was perfectly capable of making one of the Lost his vessels in hopes of traveling to the Sanctuary, or a more remote human citadel if need be, and stealing another body there. But why would he settle for a vastly inferior option when a perfect candidate was right there, held captive and waiting for him to seize it? Maybe that was the reason why he had not tried to seek out Sonny in the previous weeks. Mordred might have wanted to leave him for last. Thanks to Cassia, Sonny had a general idea about the aspects of both Welty and Pierce. The fearsome Master Pierce seemed to possess powers that made him highly resistant, if not outright immune, to various forms of attacks, while his more friendly counterpart, Master Welty, specialized in enhancing her combat prowess and debilitating the enemy. Noting that only Welty was wearing the strange anvil amulet, Sonny guessed that she was protected from Mordred's ability by its enchantment. Pierce, however, must have been capable of countering the possession simply through the might of his aspect. Cassia could not be taken too, due to her blindness. One had to look at the reflection to be possessed, which she was incapable of. Arguably, her eyes could still rove over it, but as they were covered in a milky haze, that at least protected her, even if it was at a cost. That only left Sonny. But more than that, Mordred had secretly watched him for months and knew perfectly well how powerful Sonny actually was, as well as how he spoke, behaved, and carried himself. He knew who were his friends and who were his enemies. Mordred knew everything he needed to know to impersonate him perfectly, as well as how much would be gained by stealing his aspect, shadows, and memories. Truly, Sonny was an ideal vessel. He did not know much about Sonny's real-world personality, but that wasn't much of a hurdle, and likely, Mordred didn't care too much about how he would deal with that, at least not right now. He could escape, and then get lost and evade his captors for good. It was almost as though this role had been predetermined for Sonny from the very start.
Damnation.
He hesitated for a bit, then glanced at Pierce and Welty, this time not even having to fake worry.
So, what is the plan then?
The masters lingered for a bit. Then Welty spoke, her voice dark and bitter.
We won't try to venture outside and try to bind that monster again. At this point, we don't have enough numbers to trap him anymore. However, he also has no way of infiltrating the inner sanctum, and the vessel that made time his best ally was destroyed. So, we will just wait. In about a week, maybe even less, Saint Cormac will return. Then, Prince Mordred will have to face a Transcendence wrath.
She clearly was not happy about having to take a passive approach, since, in a sense, this was as good as admitting defeat. But this plan of action did, indeed, seem like the best way to go, at least on the surface. All they had to do was barricade themselves inside the impregnable inner sanctum and wait for the cavalry to come. Surely, this much was within their ability. Sunny forced out a smile.
That is a very good plan.
Master Welty nodded, then turned to Cassia.
Lady Cassia, if your aspect brings you a helpful vision, don't hesitate to inform me immediately. Now, please go and rest, you two. Eat your fill. We all need to keep up our strength.
And just like that, the conversation was over. Sunny and Cassia stood up, bowed to the masters, then returned to the main hall. There, they endured the unfriendly gazes of the lost, filled 2 bowls with tasty-looking porridge, took a couple of opaque jars of water, and found a pair of empty straw mattresses in a remote corner. Sitting down, the two concentrated on the food, happy to finally eat something that was not synth paste. The meat porridge wasn't much, but to them, it tasted heavenly. After a while, Cassia said quietly while pretending to chew,
What do you think?
Sunny swallowed a spoonful of porridge, took a sip of water, and answered as he continued to stare at the floor.
They are lying, of course. There is no way that Mordred won't get into the inner sanctum somehow. He is too damn devious for that. I know it, and they know it too.
His shadow, meanwhile, watched the figure of the sentinel who could turn invisible to make sure that she wasn't listening in on their conversation. He kept a neutral expression as he ate some more, then added without looking at the blind girl.
What is most likely to happen is that things are going to go south very soon. Welty and Pierce will wait and observe for a bit, and then probably try to use us as bait to lay a trap for him.
Cassia remained silent for a few moments, then asked,
How do you know?
He smiled.
Because that's what I would have done.
Cassia frowned at that answer, but she did not contradict him. He saw her face relax as if agreeing with him, or at least she wasn't going to fight him on this one. After that, both continued to eat, preoccupied with their own thoughts. A few moments passed before Cassia spoke again, her voice a bit uncertain.
So then, if that's the case, what do we do?
Sunny enjoyed the taste of the porridge, chewed it slowly, and then answered calmly.
For now, nothing. Let's wait and observe, too. We can rest and eat, just like we were told to. We need to restore our strength anyway. Then we'll see.
They didn't speak after that, and after finishing their food, allowed the exhaustion to overwhelm them. Laying side by side on the thin straw mattress, Cassia and Sunny fell asleep, Only his watchful shadows remained alert, guarding their master through the night. When the two of them woke up, the air smelled of blood. Only 21 of the 23 lost were still alive. The two sentinels who kept watch outside the hall had been brutally slaughtered, without anyone even noticing how or when. Their bodies were still warm, and their blood painted the floors, the walls, and even the ceiling crimson, turning the somber corridor into a ghastly painting. In the center of the pool of blood, a single shard of mirror lay, as if mocking the surviving soldiers of the great clan Valor. Welty growled and destroyed it before anyone could approach. It seemed that Mordred chose not to hide the fact that he had entered the inner sanctum. Instead, he wanted everyone to know. He wanted everyone to see what he had done. He wanted everyone to feel scared, terrified, and haunted. He was playing with his food. Or perhaps he only wanted to inflict his past horrors on his captors. Regardless, everyone that was left standing was now on high alert and horrified, and all they could do was wait. Wait and wonder. Whom would he take next? The Lost crowded near the entrance, staring at the grisly scene with grim expressions. Welty was in the corridor. She was standing in the middle of the pool of blood, her fists clenched. Sonny wasn't clear on who had discovered the bodies, since he only woke up due to the noise of everyone rushing to the door and the shine of the sparks of light as they summoned their weapons. He remained at the back of the crowd, using one of the shadows to study the corpses, and another to observe the surviving sentinels. There was a thoughtful expression on his face.
I wonder.
Before he could finish the thought, Pierce appeared from behind the bend of the corridor, glanced at Welty, shook his head briefly, and then growled at the Lost.
What are you standing around for? Clean up this mess and secure the perimeter. No one moves alone or in pairs. 3 people minimum. Be ready. The bastard might return at any minute.
The soldiers glanced at each other, seeds of fear blooming in the depths of their eyes. Then, they silently got to work, following the master's command. Sonny lingered for a few moments, then returned to Cassia and sat down on his mattress. The blind girl asked quietly,
Who died? And how?
Sonny yawned and rubbed his face tiredly.
The guards. One was the guy who had noticed my shadow back in the Great Hall. The other, I didn't know him. As to how, pretty much the same as everyone else. Butchered and cut to pieces.
She thought for a bit, then frowned.
And no one heard a thing?
Sonny sighed.
He must have done it really fast, or his new vessel possesses an aspect that can dampen sounds.
He remained silent for a bit, then said somberly,
Anyway, you should prepare.
Cassia tilted her head.
Prepare for what? Another attack?
Sonny didn't answer immediately. Looking at the Lost, everyone seemed busy and focused, moving with trained precision and purpose. However, there was a hint of uncertainty on their pale faces. The sentinels tried to hide it, but to no avail. He looked down.
No, not an attack. Right now, everyone only thinks that Mordred somehow broke through the seals and got into the inner sanctum. However, once they have time to think, they'll realize that there's another possibility.
The blind girl paled. She didn't even bother to ask. and she didn't need to. Sunny smiled darkly and added,
He has been with them this whole time, hiding in one of the two strangers who had miraculously escaped an enchanted cell and insisted on being taken to this shelter. You, or me.
Cassia gritted her teeth.
There's no reasonable way to pin these murders on us.
He chuckled menacingly.
What does reason have to do with any of this? The reason is always the first victim when fear arrives.
With that, he fell silent, and, after a few seconds, rose to go and get them some breakfast. As Sunny walked toward the part of the hall that had been converted into a makeshift kitchen, many gazes followed him. Just as he had expected, they were slowly turning dark and dangerous, full of hostility, fear, and suspicion. Pretending to be appropriately frightened too, he put some porridge in the bowls.
Interesting,
he thought. Mordred might not have been as crazed as Sunny had thought before. From the start of it, something about how the Prince of Nothing behaved did not sit right with Sunny. Mordred had shown himself to be extremely cunning and meticulous, crafting such a masterful trap that even Sunny, who was an ingenious deceiver as well, fell into it without suspecting a thing. The sadistic way in which dozens of the Lost had been killed, and the morbid displays of demented butchery that the prince had left in the halls of the Night Temple, however, were utterly impractical and did not fit into this image of a cold and calculating strategist at all. Now that Mordred had decided to reveal his presence in the inner sanctum and sacrifice the invaluable advantage of surprise in exchange for only 2 lives, Sunny became convinced that there was a method to his madness. And as the surviving Lost followed him with heavy gazes, dark expressions contorting their faces, he was pretty sure that he understood its purpose. Mordred wanted them to be suspicious of each other. He wanted them to be tense and scared. He wanted their spirits to break. Why? To make their souls weak and their willpower shaken, of course. It would make them all the easier for him to overpower, for him to catch. This suggested that his ability to devour souls was not absolute and required the victim to be... what? To be defeated? To surrender? Or simply to be weaker than his? Sunny shook his head.
What a bastard.
He returned to Cassia and gave her a bowl of porridge, then frowned. Honestly, he wasn't sure who was scarier, the unhinged lunatic who enjoyed torturing his victims before murdering them in horrific ways, or a cold-blooded killer who uncaringly did the same simply because it suited his practical goals. Arguably, the unhinged lunatic would be easier to predict, in a strange way. If he was unhinged, then expecting erratic and violent behavior was wise. But if he was cold, calculating, and cunning, then what? If anything, every move Mordred would make would need to be held under intense scrutiny. Either way, the result would be the same. The Lost were shaken, but not nearly close to breaking down. At least not yet. This meant that Mordred was not going to stop. No. He was only getting started sowing terror into the souls. More and more. The remaining question was, how was Sunny supposed to stop him? He ate his porridge, then glanced at Pierce and Welty, who were speaking quietly near the doors. Perhaps that wasn't the only lingering question. It wasn't just how was Sunny going to stop him, but should he? Soon, Master Pierce summoned the 10 Echoes. Even though maintaining them at all times cost a considerable amount of essence, It was decided that the disturbing things would remain among the lost from now on. Several were sent to explore the inner sanctum and try to find signs of the attacker, or at least learn how he had managed to get inside. The rest assumed guarding positions outside the hall, making the remaining sentinels feel both relieved and tense. Not even these experienced warriors felt comfortable in the presence of human echoes. The security measures were enhanced as well. No one was allowed to remain alone, and if there was a need to leave the common area, only groups of 3 could do so. Sunny and Cassia had to recruit the help of the female sentinel, the one who could turn invisible, just to visit the bathroom. And yet, none of these measures helped protect the stronghold. Come the next morning, 2 more lost were dead. This time, they were killed inside the hall itself, not even in the corridor outside.
Shit.
Sunny knew this was coming, but that didn't make it any easier. One by one, the eyes of the horrified and angry lost turned to him. Sunny clenched his jaw.
Here we go.
After that, things turned really ugly for Sunny. Two days had passed after the battle with Mordret's previous vessel and the army of corpse puppets he had created with its help. Those of the wounded who had received light injuries were already back on their feet, but 3 of the sentinels were still in bad shape. Their comrades were doing everything in their power to treat their wounds, but with every healer in the Citadel already dead, there was little that could be done to hasten the recovery. One of the corners of the hall was converted into an infirmary, where the 3 heavily injured sentinels rested and received care. In the morning, a piercing scream suddenly echoed between the black stone walls. Those who were sleeping jumped up, grabbing the weapons that they had kept summoned to be ready for an attack. Those who remained awake were already moving, rushing toward the source of the scream, the makeshift infirmary. Sunny simply sat up on his mattress, a tense expression on his face. There were 3 cots for the wounded standing in a row along the wall. It was a lost who occupied the middle one that was screaming, his face contorted by an expression of sheer terror. The other 2 were already dead. Their throats were sliced open, blood streaming to the floor. Both were killed in their sleep, without alerting anyone around. As far away from the entrance to the hall as it was possible, right in the middle of the Sentinels' camp. The third one clearly could have been murdered as well, and had been left alive on purpose, as if to mock the lost. It was as though Mordret was telling them that no one was safe, and that he was perfectly capable of taking each of them whenever he pleased.
What?
How did he get inside?
He might still be here.
The lost were on the verge of panicking, but in the end, their training and skill prevailed. Instead of descending into chaos, the situation inside the hall immediately turned into a coordinated action. Even before Pierce and Welty arrived, the sentinels were already moving to stand in a defensive formation, weapons drawn and ready for battle. The 2 masters appeared mere seconds after the scream. They quickly assessed the situation and joined their soldiers, half of the echoes moving closer, half barring the doors. For a few moments there was a tense silence in the stronghold of the Valor forces. The surviving sentinels waited tensely by the infirmary, while 5 empty-eyed echoes blocked the exit. There was no one else in the hall, except for Sunny and Cassia, who had not moved from the start of it all. Slowly, all of the lost focused on the 2 of them. Their gazes were dark, cold, and full of danger. Sunny's face twitched.
Crap.
Was Mordred aware of how these actions would affect the 2 of them? Was he trying to force them out into the open on purpose, making it impossible to stay with the Sentinels? What was his damn plan, really? What was his endgame? How was he planning to deal with St. Cormac in a few days? And what role was everyone else supposed to play before that? Sonny opened his mouth, wishing to say something to defuse the situation, but one of the Lost was faster.
It's them. It must be one of them.
As soon as this first accusation was made, the floodgates were open. A moment later, Sonny and Cassia were assaulted by a litany of cries, all blaming them for the deaths of the 2 wounded sentinels. Sonny stared at the crowd of Lost, feeling his heart grow cold. A single person could be reasoned with, but what he saw right now was not a group of people, but a massive creature with many heads, many shouting mouths, and many eyes that burned with fury, fear, and dark murderous intent. A frightened crowd did not know reason. It only knew fear and the desire to either escape or destroy its source. There were very few things more frightening than a senseless crowd. The Lost were much more resilient and prepared than most people, but even battle-hardened warriors like them had limits. After weeks of being hunted, slaughtered, and brutalized by the elusive and terrifying fiend, they seemed to have finally reached it. Of course, there was no logic behind the accusations. Neither Sonny nor Cassia possessed the means to commit the murder unnoticed, simply because they had been watched this entire time, since no one trusted them to begin with. But his attempt to explain this was drowned by the chorus of angry shouts. Sonny noticed Pierce and Welty exchanging a quick look, their faces calm, but somber. At least these 2 had managed to keep a cool head. But would that change anything? His heartbeat slowed. Sonny mentally took in the entirety of the hall, the echoes standing guard near the doors, the 2 masters, the formation of the Lost, the dead sentinels laying on the blood-soaked cots. Would he be able to fight his way out of this place? And what would happen next? The forces of Valor would surely pursue him and Cassia. It was at this moment that a sudden realization hit him. Sonny hesitated for a moment, then slowly rose to his feet. His hand hovered in the air as if ready to summon a weapon. The action was enough to cause a chain effect among the Lost. One of them suddenly lunged forward, throwing a javelin at Sonny. Another drew his bow, an arrow already knocked on the string. Nothing came of it, however. Almost instantly, Pierce growled, his voice easily suppressing the shouts.
Stop, you wretched bastards! Who ordered you to attack? Anyone who moves, I'll kill you myself.
At the same time, Welty turned into a blur and appeared in front of Sonny, catching the javelin before it could get anywhere near him. She looked at the weapon with a scowl, then threw it on the floor. The echoes standing in front of the sentinel formation suddenly turned, facing the Lost. Their empty eyes stared at the frightened warriors, no emotion in them. And just like that, the 2 masters tamed the wild beast of the human crowd. No matter how far gone the sentinels were, there were still remnants of discipline etched deep into their bones. More than that, the easiest way to defeat fear was with a different, much greater fear. Under the unnerving gaze of the echoes, the accusing shouts abruptly stopped. The Lost hesitated, then hesitantly lowered their weapons. However, their burning gazes were still focused on Sonny and Cassia, their thirst for violence temporarily leashed, but not quenched. Welty lingered for a moment, then looked at them over her shoulder.
You better come with me. It is not safe for the 2 of you to remain with the others. Don't worry, though. We'll keep you safe.
Sonny pretended to shiver, glancing at the crowd of the Lost, and nodded.
Sure. Yeah. No problem.
Inwardly, though, he was grinning.
Keep us safe. What a bunch of crap.
Sonny and Cassia were led deeper into the inner sanctum. They passed the room with the round table where the two masters had first interrogated them, then the personal quarters of the ascended knights, and were finally led to a small room with a single door. Welty led them inside and remained at the threshold. She was quiet for a few moments, and then said,
"Wait for a bit. I will bring you food and water later. These will be your lodgings from now on. So, get comfortable."
With that, she closed the door and left. Sonny smiled darkly. He didn't hear the click of the lock, but the implication was clear. The small room was much more comfortable than the iron cage, but it served the same purpose. Once again, they were in a prison cell. However, Sonny knew that this time, they wouldn't be staying in it long.